about Old Man Lester. He was back from the dead as a poltergeist. The town was about to be turned upside down. October 1st at midnight. The lights in the townspeople's homes would come on and off on their own. Their TVs would turn on by themselves, as well as their radios blaring music from the speakers, which would affect people's sleep also. No one could get a good night's rest. After about a week, Old Man Lester stepped up the poltergeist activity by throwing dinner plates and glasses, setting fires in their homes. The town finally had all they could take and held a seance to see what was causing the poltergeist activity. As the medium was trying to communicate with the dead, a voice said, "I have come back from the dead because I promised the town that killed me I would turn the town upside down every October for 30 days. Someone at the table said, "I know it is. It's Old Man Lester seeking vengeance on us all." The medium snapped out of her trance-like state. The townspeople at least knew who was responsible, but did little good to stop Lester's reign of terror. All poltergeist activity stopped at the stroke of midnight on October the 31st. A priest had been called to exorcise each home, to no avail. Some of the townspeople even used Ouija boards to try and communicate with Old Man Lester and ask him why he won't stay dead. But he said, "As long as you all live in this town, I'll be back every October as promised, and there will be no rest, and will only get worse until you're all dead." Looks like the little town of Helen picked on the wrong man and will now have to live out terror every October unless they decide to pack up and leave and never return. Or they could just stay and face music like they should. I mean, they took a man's life, so I'm sure they deserved it, right? The end. And that is the strange and odd story from Drac von Stoller. Drac von Stoller has many books, by the way. They're all very short stories, but they're all great. And he's really good at writing short stories, so if you like those, you can definitely hop over to the Google Books. They're all there for free if you go to Google Play Books. There's many of them for free. Thank you for listening to this episode of Drac von Stoller. And many blessings. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. And this story is called The Horror Within by Drac von Stoller. Jasper Davis was the most hated man in town and didn't give a damn what anyone thought of him, and he didn't hesitate in starting a fight which the townspeople were too scared to cross him because of the horror within that possessed him. Elections were around the corner for a new mayor. "There's not one person to run this town than me, so I will run and win by a landslide," laughed Jasper. Jasper went door to door, but most doors were slammed in his face, but with regret, because he would kick the door down and tell them, "If you don't vote for me, there'll be hell to pay. I will burn your house to the ground, and that's a promise." As Jasper was doing his campaign house to house, a man yelled across the street, "I'm not afraid of you, Jasper Davis, you low-life piece of crap." Jasper turned around, boiling inside like an erupting volcano, and shouted, "You'll regret what you just said." Jasper marched across the neighbour's yard and picked up a campaign sign out of the ground, walked up to the man that made threats, and drove the wooden stake through his chest that was still attached to the sign. The man collapsed to the ground dead, and Jasper spat on him, saying, "I guess this means you won't be able to vote for me in the election. Then Jasper reached in the man's back pocket, pulled out his wallet. He took his social security card and laughed. Well, since I have your social security card, I can count your vote after all. The dead man's wife ran out of the house screaming and knelt down crying over her husband's body. She looked up at Jasper and shouted, "How could you?" Jasper shouted back, "Go find yourself another husband. Besides, he's probably worth more dead than alive." She cursed him up and down. Jasper pulled his gun out of his belt and told her, "Shut up." But she just kept screaming at him. So he shot her right between the eyes and walked off to continue his campaign. The police were called by another neighbour who was friends with the husband and wife. The elderly man waved his cell phone in the air and said, "Jasper Davis, you can't go around killing everyone in town and get away with it." Jasper replied, "It's lights out for you, old man." The old man turned his back on Jasper, and as he placed his hand on the door, Jasper shot him in the back. The old man dropped to his knees, saying a prayer, and then another shot rang out, hitting him on the back of the head, ending his suffering. Jasper Davis became the new mayor of the small town, but the town's population was dwindling rapidly because Jasper thought the only way to settle a dispute was to use deadly force. Jasper thought he was on top of the world, but his new position as the mayor of the town was coming to a screeching halt because the townspeople were coming back from the dead to stop his reign of terror and get the town back. As Jasper was taking a snooze at the desk in his office, and time got by him, night time set in and there was a loud banging on his door. This startled him and he said, "Who could that be?" Before Jasper could get out of his chair to answer the door flung wide open, and the dead townspeople came inside, with campaign signs still attached to wood stakes that surrounded Jasper at his desk. Jasper started firing shot after shot at the dead townspeople. He said, "I am the mayor of this town, and I command you all to go back to the cemetery where you came from." The townspeople took their signs and drove the stakes into his body, killing him instantly. Looks like running a deadly campaign isn't the best way to run a town, as Jasper found out in the end. And with this crazy nut gone, the townspeople could go back to the cemetery and rest in peace should anyone else come to this town and decide to get some crazy idea about running for office like Jasper did. They too will get a campaign sign with a stake attached to it, drove straight through their heart. And what a hell of a price to pay for running for office. The end. And that is another tale from Drac von Stoller. Thank you so much for listening, and many blessings. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and another Drac von Stoller story. This is called The Black Cat. What's come over me? I sit all alone in this dark, desolate castle with no one to talk to. I find myself overcome with fear of leaving this dark place to see the outside world. I've been cooped up inside these castle walls for so many years and can't remember what day it was, let alone the year. I feel so safe in my castle. Besides, what could this world have to offer me anyway? Said Count Drac von Stoller to himself. Count Drac von Stoller recalled the happy years when he had a beautiful wife named Marie. However, an unfortunate illness took her at such a young age. The Count never fully recovered from her death. Now the Count spends his lonely days inside his castle thinking of his beautiful wife, Marie, and stares at her portrait on the wall in the study, talking directly at the painting as though she can hear what he's saying. One night, when the Count was reading a book on ghosts, he caught a glimpse of something in the corner of his eye that frightened the willies out of him. It was a black cat. cat with blazing red eyes. The Count brushed it off as just his mind playing tricks on him. The cat leaped from the window sill onto the ground and headed to the front door of the castle. The Count said to himself, "Looks like the cats are gone now. I can get back to my reading." However, the cat was far from gone. Suddenly, the cat started clawing at the door and whining. The Count stopped reading his book to listen to the noise that was coming from outside the door. The whining and scratching got louder and louder. The Count slammed his book on the desk and said to himself, "I can't finish my book with that scratching at my door." The Count got out of his chair and opened the study door. He followed the noise down the dark hall to the front door of the castle, hoping that it was just his mind playing tricks. The Count slowly opened the door, breathing heavily, not knowing what lurked outside the castle door. "It's just a black cat. What harm could come from a black cat?" Count Drac von Stoller said to himself, almost reassuring himself. The Count let the black cat inside the castle. The black cat wasn't a harmless type that you would have as a pet. This black cat was from the depths of hell, bringing black magic that the Count never knew existed. The Count bent over to pick up the cat, but the cat wasn't looking for comfort, just the taste of the Count's bleeding heart. As the Count picked up the cat and held the cat in front of his face, the cat scratched him, leaving deep, bloody canals in his face. He threw the cat across the room with anger. The black cat let out a screeching noise that deafened the Count's hearing. The Count ran back into his study, where he felt safe. However, his life at hell had just begun. The Count sat behind his desk reading his ghost book. The black cat came back to his door, whining and clawing. No matter how hard the Count tried to block out the noise, it just got louder. Days went by with nothing accomplished, and the whining and scratching went on 24 hours a day. The Count couldn't get any sleep and lost his appetite. The Count was slowly going insane. Count Drac von Stoller paced back and forth in front of the study door, shouting and pleading with the cat to go away. However, no pleading or begging could stop the hell the Count had let into his castle. Sometimes the Count would open the study door to see the black cat licking his teeth as though he was getting ready for a tasty meal. The Count was unaware that the tasty meal was going to be him. Finally, he was too weak to carry on, so he sat in his chair, then drifted in and out of consciousness and began to hallucinate. The Count was barely clinging on to life when the study door opened and the black cat growled at him. Then the black cat climbed up onto the Count's body, licking his teeth. The black cat proceeded to rip into the Count's chest with its sharp claws until his bleeding heart was lying top of his chest. The black cat licked his teeth and ran his tongue over the Count Drac von Stoller's bleeding heart as it was still beating. Count Drac von Stoller took one last look and screamed, "No, no, not my heart!" Then the cat's fangs sunk into the Count's heart. The black cat licked up all the blood and drained it all out of his heart. As Count Drac von Stoller's bloody body, lay in his chair with his half-eaten heart lying out on his chest, the black cat let out a growl. Then the black cat leaped off the Count's bloody body to return nevermore. The Count's fears beyond the castle walls became a reality about how the unknown can and will eventually catch up with you. If you dwell on it day after day, year after year, let it eat you up inside, as the Count did, then you too will succumb to the fear of the unknown. The end. And of course, the story is a metaphor for the fearful, being too afraid to make that step, too afraid to seek the unknown, showing that if you do not, something will come looking for you sooner or later, so you may as well just go ahead and do it, right? Thank you for listening, and many blessings. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So we are continuing with the stories by Drac von Stoller. And this story is called The Urban Legends Killings. Sally Edwards didn't have many friends at Gravendale High School. Whenever Sally tried out sports, she would be picked on by her classmates because she was a tomboy. Sally had buck teeth and matted hair and slurred her speech. She also wore the same clothes to school every day. Sally was poor and was being raised by her alcoholic grandfather, who didn't have long to live, maybe weeks at best. When her classmates got wind of the passing of her grandfather the following week, they started picking on her pretty hard. Classmates would say things like, "I can see why your grandfather died so soon. It's because he's so ugly and stupid. Just the looks of you helped shorten his life." Sally was boiling inside and had nowhere to turn or seek comfort in the arms of her parents. Sally's parents were both killed in a home invasion, and the only living relative she had was her alcoholic grandfather. Sally's dreams of having a loving family ceased to exist from the pull of a trigger. Sally never got much food to eat from her grandfather's because he was always spending what little money he had on alcohol. In her grandfather's mind, alcohol is the only friend he had and loved. Sally had to revert to going through neighbours' trash cans for her daily meals. Sometimes neighbours felt sorry for her and welcomed her into their home for food. Nothing seemed to help her heal the wounds she was bottling up inside. Things were all about to come to a head with her classmates that would turn deadly. Yes, I said those words. Would turn deadly for them all. But what? What could be so deadly? So, if you've heard these urban legend stories, you'll probably know where this story is actually going. If not, let's crack on. Prom night was around the corner, and Sally's always dreamed about being asked to prom by the high school's most popular guy. Sally's dream was about to become reality, but only for a brief moment. Doug Stevens was Gravendale's star quarterback, the most popular guy in school. Doug had a few of his buddies had a plan to make Sally the laughingstock of the school. Their plan would push Sally over the edge, bring devastating consequences to Doug and his friends. Doug asked Sally, before school was out, to be his date at the prom, and she accepted. Doug met his buddies in the back of the school to go over the details about the prank. Doug arrived at Sally's house around 6 p.m., excited about the joke that was about to unfold at the prom in just about an hour or so. Doug knocked on Sally's front door. Sally opened the door and said, "Hi, Doug. You look handsome in your tuxedo." Doug replied, "Sally, you look nice in your dress. Are you ready to have the time of our lives?" "Yes, I am," answered Sally in excitement, unaware that Doug didn't care about having a good time with Sally. All he was thinking about was making her the laughingstock of the school. Sally and Doug got into the car and drove to the prom. Doug arrived 30 minutes before the dance started at 7 p.m. to make sure all his buddies showed up. Doug and Sally entered the dance floor, music blaring. Doug asked Sally if she would like to dance. Sally said, "Yes, I'd love to dance." As Doug and Sally were dancing, Doug's two buddies, Sam and Larry, came up to them and started a conversation with Doug about the dance. Sam chimed in and said, "Doug, would you mind if Larry and I could have one dance with your pretty date?" Doug replied, "Sure, no problem." Sam started dancing with Sally. while Doug went over to get some punch and Larry stood behind Sally, waiting for Sam to push Sally in Larry's arms and watch the prank unfold. As Doug returned to his date, Sam pushed Sally. She fell into Larry's arms. Then Doug tore her dress off, exposing her body for everyone at the dance to see and laugh. Sally screamed out and said, "If you don't stop, if you just don't stop, leave me alone. I'm going to kill you, all of you." Of course, no one really cared. Everyone just started laughing and tossing their drinks at Sally and calling her names. Sally immediately covered her body with her dress, ran out of prom, crying. Sally ran home to an empty house, crying her eyes out all night, knowing that when she returned to school in the morning, the students would all be laughing at her and calling her names. Sally decided not to show up to school tomorrow and figure out a way to make Doug, Larry, and Sam pay for what they did to her at prom night. Sally laid in bed, planning how to get even with them. A faint voice, whispered in her ear what to do. The voice told her to use urban legends to kill them off. When Sally got up the next morning, she headed to the library to read up on urban legends and picked out a special one for Doug, Larry, and Sam. As Sally read over the list of urban legends, she decided to use the killer in the back seat on Larry. Sally went to the local hardware store and picked up a hunting knife. Then she went to the department store to get a coat with a hood, dark sunglasses and gloves. Sally also bought a bike to get around on and, stuffed her disguise in a duffel bag. She decided she would arrive at Larry's work around 10 p.m., 1 hour before he gets off work, just enough time to break into his car and put on her disguise. Larry got in his car, not noticing that there was someone in his back seat, and mainly because the dome light in his old Chevy was still on. Larry started his car and drove off into the night, anticipating his head hitting on the pillow and drifting off to Neverland. But he wouldn't be getting a good night's rest tonight. Only a dead night's rest. As Larry's car was barreling down the road, Sally rose up from the floorboard and said, "Larry, Sally's got a surprise for you. Just a small token of appreciation for humiliating me on prom night, the most special day of my night." Larry turned his head around and said, "What are you doing in my back seat? I meant nothing by it. We were only having a little fun. Besides, it was Doug's idea in the first place." "Then you should have stopped what was happening to me, but you chose not to. You must pay," Sally said. Larry pleaded with her and pleaded for all he could, but unfortunately, that didn't work. She was too mad, too angry at what he had done to her. Sally pulled out her hunting knife and stabbed Larry in the neck and the head repeatedly, as the car was swerving side to side on the dark road before running off the road into a ditch. Just before Sally got out of the car, she tore off his shirt and carved on his chest, "If you don't stop, I'm going to kill you." Sally wiped the blood off the knife with his coat, took her disguise off, and put it in the duffel bag. She tossed the duffel bag in the weeds far away from the crime scene, then walked back to Larry's house, where she left the bike and pedaled back home to scratch off the list and plan the next urban legend she would use for Sam. Since Doug hurt her the most, she wanted to save the best for last. As Sally was sitting at the kitchen table in her house, she said, "I know just what urban legend to use for Sam. I believe buried alive would be a perfect one for him." Sally decided she would call Sam on the phone and invite him over to her house for ice cream. Sam picked up the phone and said, "Hello, who's calling?" Sally answered, "It's Sally. Remember the prank you played on me at prom?" "Well, I've thought about that night and decided it's ridiculous for me to hold such a grudge against you. I hope we can still be friends," Sam replied. "I'm sorry for the prank, but Doug put me up to it. I thought a good way to put this behind us would be if you would be my guest at my house tonight around 7 p.m. for ice cream. What do you say? It's homemade." Sam said, "That sounds like a good idea. I'll see you around 7 tonight." They both hung up the phone. Sally quickly went to work in the backyard, preparing the grave for Sam. Sam arrived right on time. Sally mixed enough sleeping medication in the ice cream to knock him out and buy enough time for Sally to bury him without his knowledge. As Sam was sitting at Sally's kitchen table eating the ice cream, he said, "Sally, I'm glad we're going to put this behind us. That was wrong for Doug to think of such a humiliating thing to do to you. I don't know why I agreed to help him, but I did. I hope you'll accept my apology." "Don't worry about it. What happened will be buried and forgot about soon," replied Sally. Of course, she did have this wicked smile upon her face as she said those words. Sam said, "Sally, my vision's getting blurry." Then all of a sudden, Sam's head hit the table and he passed out. As Sam was sleeping and unaware of what Sally did, Sally came over and shook him to see if he was in deep sleep. Sam gave no response, so Sally knew that he wouldn't wake up. So, just to be sure, she shouted out very loud, "Sam, when you wake up, you will be buried alive in my backyard. With only a garden hose to suck in the last precious breaths of air from the outside world." We all take that for granted. Sally dragged Sam's body out to his grave, the one she prepared for him. Sally placed Sam in a plywood coffin she made for his final resting place in the ground. Sally patted down the last pile of dirt on his grave and said, "When you wake up, yes, you'll have to realize you've been buried alive. Maybe you'll understand how badly you hurt me and why you must die for the pain you caused me." Sally went inside her house to watch TV for about an hour, and then she decided to check on Sam. Sally went over to the grave and said, "Well, Sam, I think it's time to end your suffering." She reached down and pulled the garden hose out of the ground. She noticed there was no resistance as she was pulling the garden hose out. She turned away from his grave and headed back into the house to plan the last urban legend she would use on Doug to finish the job. Sally sat down at the kitchen table, trying to come up with the perfect urban legend for Doug. About an hour of mulling over many legends, it finally dawned on her that Doug had a girlfriend. Sally said, "I know the perfect urban legend. I've just got to find out the day Doug will be taking his girlfriend to the hilltop that overlooks the city at night and where the lovers are going to make out." Sally knew Doug's girlfriend, and she knew Doug's girlfriend's best friend, Jan. So what Sally did, she jumped on the opportunity to find out just when they would be going to Hilltop to make out by asking the best friend. And after 3 days of asking Jan, she said, Doug's girlfriend, Mary, said they would be driving up to the Hilltop after the movie around 10 p.m. on Friday night. Sally was excited and said to herself, the urban legend I'm going to use on Doug is the hook. Friday finally came, and Sally arrived at the Hilltop about 15 minutes before Doug and his girlfriend. Sally was dressed in a hooded coat and jeans with a hook attached to her right hand. Sally was waiting behind a tree ready to seek revenge on Doug and get on with her life as though nothing ever happened. But Sally wouldn't be celebrating very long. Sally approached Doug's car as the two lovers were kissing and ran a hook across the trunk of the vehicle. Doug's girlfriend said, "Doug, did you hear that? Did you hear that noise?" Doug replied, "It's nothing." Mary said, "I think maybe we should go home." Doug replied, "I'll lock the doors. You'll be safe in my arms." The two lovebirds resumed kissing, and Sally swung her arm with the hook and shattered Doug's driver's side window. With all her might, she stuck the hook into his head. Mary was screaming, and Sally ran around to the passenger door. She opened the door and grabbed poor Mary by the throat and swung her arm with the hook. Yes, with the hook. Right into Mary, cutting her head right off her shoulders. Sally was relieved to have Larry, Sam, and Doug out of her life for good. Sally went back home, and she slept like a baby. Morning arrived, and as months went by and the murders went unsolved, Sally thought she was scot-free. Think again. Sally, one night, yes, one night, as Sally was fast asleep, there was a loud knocking on the bedroom door. Sally jumped out of bed to see who was knocking at the door. When she opened the door, she got the shock of her life. The excitement was so overwhelming that Sally had a massive heart attack and died right where she stood. The reason that Sally was frightened to death was that, well, the urban legends she used on Larry, Sam and Doug came back from the dead to seek revenge from beyond the grave. All Sally's urban legends backfired in the end. The dead could finally rest in peace. The end. And that is the Urban Legends Killings by Drac von Stoller. It's an awesome story, isn't it? We all know urban legends. We all love urban legends. However, we don't all go and play out urban legends. That's a big no-no, guys. Bear in mind, this is just a fantasy myth. It's not real. It's fiction, okay? It's fiction. Thank you for listening, and many blessings. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and a dark fairy tale. In a rather strange forest, in a world unknown to humans, lived a fairly small fairies called Diana. Like most fairies, Diana was kind, considerate, and always happy to help. As you probably already know, fairies possess magical powers. Tales say fairies can create gold from nothing, summon monsters, and even change history. I don't know how much of that is actually true, but even from exaggeration, you can imagine fairies are powerful creatures, despite some of their lack of height. However, it's important to note that fairies were not selfish with their magic. They healed sick mothers, gave courage to heroes, led starving folk to food, tricked devious trolls, and also helped lost children find their way home. Fairies were particularly helpful and caring towards children, not for vindictive reason, but because they have a natural desire to protect the small and innocent. During times of hardship and war, the presence of a magical fairy had life-changing effects on children. The fairies never asked for anything in return. All they wanted was to help and bring smiles to children's faces. As you can see, fairies are incredibly kind-hearted. Throughout history, they have been a divine presence, a bright light in a dark world. But times have changed since then. For the last century, fairies had been forbidden from leaving their home. Instead of helping children, fairies were expected to be content with just helping other fairies. However, Diana was not content. When she was a youngling, barely the size of a bean, she dreamed about venturing out to help humans. She did not see why fairies stayed hidden in their sanctuary, keeping their powers to themselves, when there were people out there in the beyond who would benefit from her gifts. Every day after she completed her task, Diana would fly up the tallest tree, sit on the tallest branch, where she could gaze out into the distance. She would imagine what it'd be like to fly out and assist needy folk. In the past, as soon as a fairy's wings were strong enough, they were expected to leave their home and travel the world. Diana's precious wings flickered with excitement at the thought of leaving, but she knew it was not possible. Fairies are not allowed to leave. At sunset, Diana began the flight to her family's house. On the way, she came across Mother Fairy, who was the wisest and strongest and perhaps the plumpest of all fairies. "Diana, why do you look so glum?" Mother Fairy asked. "For a long time now, I've seen you plagued by unhappiness. Tell me what troubles you so I can help." "Dear Mother," Diana sighed, "I yearn to go out into the human world. My ancestor brought happiness to children and made their greatest wishes come true. I want to do the same. I want to help." Mother Fairy took Diana's hand. It's Diana's, but, sympathy glittered in her eyes as she said, "I understand the unrest you feel. It's in our nature to act as guardians to those who need, but it's not safe to leave." "Why isn't it safe?" "I know I'm forbidden to leave, but I've never been told the reason why. Please tell me now, Mother." A spell of sadness overcame Mother Fairy, and she decided to share the truth with Diana. She hoped the truth would expel the young fairy's desire for the outside world. Mother Fairy floated around Diana as she told her tale. The world changed, and it became a dangerous, dangerous place for fairies. And as the world changed, so did children. They are no longer in need for our magic. We decided it would be safer for all fairies to remain behind our walls. "But that was centuries ago," Diana said. "Perhaps the world has changed again, and there are children waiting for our aid. I could go, and certainly not. I forbid it." Mother Fairy tapped her staff on the ground like she was announcing a proclamation. "I won't risk the life of a fairy just so you can go quench your curiosity." Diana held back her tears. Mother Fairy held an arm around her. "I understand. I was like you once. I wondered and yearned for the world outside, but you must accept the truth. The world has changed, and we have to change too. Use your wonderful wings and your marvelous magic for the good of our kind. Your desires will ease away soon, I promise." Mother Fairy smiled, and Diana smiled too, until Mother Fairy flew away. Diana wished she could forget her dream and be like other fairies, but she was so convinced that this dream and desire would never leave her. That night, as Diana watched the fireflies and listened to the songs of the forest, she knew she had to go to human world, even if it was only for a day. In one single day, she could see the world for herself and finally silence her whispering temptations. If she were able to help one child, she knew that one good deed would make her content forever. So that's exactly what Diana did. Before the sun rose, she flew through the land of fairies and made it to the border. She didn't even glance back to say farewell. Diana knew she would be back before anyone noticed she was gone. Spreading her wings, she soared over the walls and through the veil. Within an instant, she felt the fresh wind breathe upon her face, and she flew into a bright blue sky. She did not dare blink. She did not want to miss a thing. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she gazed at the green fields, the trees, the rivers, the paths, and the houses. She had seen old drawings by fairies, depicting what the human world looked like. But those drawings now looked amateur in comparison to the grand world she saw around her. And there were some things she did not recognize, such as strange metal towers and long ugly lines hanging through the air, which seemed to cackle like the beginning of a thunderstorm. Diana flew for almost 3 hours before she remembered her purpose. At the next house she found, she glided down and landed on a painted fence. Playing in the garden, surrounded by wooden toys, was a small boy. Diana watched him. It was certainly different than the pictures she had seen before. His cheeks were round, pinkish in colour. His belly bulged out the sides of his pants, and his hair was cleanly combed. From his height, he was probably 7, 8, maybe 9. Diana tried to guess. He grinned as he played with the toy soldier. He held it up in the air like it was flying. As Diana sat perched on the fence, she wondered if there was anything more she could do for the boy. He already seemed happy and content. She was about to fly again when she decided to fly over to the boy. She wasn't sure how far it would be until she found another child. It would be a shame to not at least say hello and see if there was anything she could do to aid him or help him, of course. Diana flew over and landed on a tulip close by the boy, and she tried to say, "Hello, excuse me, hello there." But of course, the boy was looking round, but could not see Diana on the tulip. Then she shouted, "I'm down here," and waved and smiled, so the boy could finally see her. "What are you?" the boy demanded. Any fear had now disappeared that was in his face before. "My name is Diana. I'm a fairy." Then she curtsied politely. "A fairy? Psh, fairies don't exist. They're made up for kids, little kids." Diana smiled. She wanted to tell him he was only a little kid too, but she fought against it. She didn't want to upset him. Instead, she said, "If they are made up, then why am I standing here? I'm as real as you are." "Really?" The boy crossed his arms and frowned. "Maybe I'm asleep. I'm in a dream. It's all a dream." Diana did not really know what to say to that. She presumed all children knew fairies were real. She never expected she would have to persuade them otherwise. The boy wiped his nose on his sleeve and mumbled, "Mum says things are only real if you can touch them. That's why the monster under my bed isn't real. If I can touch you, I can see if you're real or not." Diana shifted uncomfortably. The boy was much bigger than her, and she didn't like the idea of being poked or prodded. But if it persuaded the boy she was real, it'd only be temporary discomfort. "Very well." Diana nodded. So the fairy reached out her hand, and the boy stared at her for a moment. Then lifted his arm and pressed the tip of his chubby finger against her hand. Diana smiled as the boy's eyes widened, and so did his smile. His face was alight with amazement. "You really are real?" "Yes," Diana laughed. "I really am." The boy chuckled. "Wow, this is amazing." Before Diana could say anything, the boy snatched her up in his fat fingers. Diana froze with terror. His fingers squeezed around her body. "Please let me go. You're hurting me," Diana squeaked. Tears fell from her eyes. The boy suddenly opened his hand, and Diana collapsed onto his palm. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." The boy watched her worriedly. "I only wanted to have a closer look." "It's fine," Diana gasped. Her entire body ached, but she knew he didn't mean to cause her any harm. She stretched her wings. The boy had bent them, accidentally, of course. Her precious wings slowly returned to their natural shape. She stood up and smiled. See, no harm done. Those are beautiful, the boy gasped at her wings. Thank you, Diana blushed. She was very proud of her wings. They were a constant companion. A fairy's wings made it possible to soar through the sky and venture to different worlds, like a bird. A fairy's life depended on their wings. Without wings, a fairy would just be a tiny speck in a vast, dangerous world. Can I touch them? The boy asked. And before Diana could even respond, he reached for her wings. Diana leaped out of the way and pressed her wings against her back. No, Diana said firmly, you cannot touch my wings. They're fragile and precious to me. A fairy only ever has one pair of wings. If I lose them, even my magic cannot bring them back. Okay, fine, the boy sulked, while he pulled his hand away. His eyes remained fixed on Diana's wings. She tried to ignore it. Remember, he's just a child, she said to himself, standing on his palm. Diana looked up at the little boy and said, I've travelled many miles with single hope to make a single child's wish come true. Is there anything I can do for you? You can make any of my wishes come true, the boy asked. Yes, indeed, Diana nodded. If you are hungry, I can summon food. If you want to be smarter, I can improve your intelligence. Anything you wish. Anything. Diana nodded. So the boy pressed his lips together. If I wanted to have your wings, could I wish for them? Diana flinched. She took a step back on the boy's hand. Well, no. They're my wings. I need them to go home. But you said I could wish for anything. Anything I wanted. The boy glared at her. You cannot wish for anything else, surely, Diana said nervously. Look, I can bring you the bestest cake you've ever eaten. I can give you the bestest clothes, or perhaps I don't want any of that. I want your wings. No, Diana was surprised by the anger in the tone. And this was how it wasn't how it was all supposed to play out. I've already told you, you can't have them. Before Diana could react, the boy grabbed her wings and hauled her body up into the air. Her wings flapped and struggled like a fly caught in a web. I said, I want your wings, the boy yelled, as he tore Diana's wings off her back. Bone snapped, flesh tore, and blood spurted out. Diana did not scream, but something inside her did. The boy let her fall down in the cold, harsh grass. She lay still, not moving, barely breathing. The toy soldier the boy had thrown earlier seemed to stare into her eyes with a familiar broken emptiness. The boy ignored Diana as he gazed and prodded at her wings, and he muttered, They're so pretty. Suddenly the wings cracked and shattered into thousands of glittering pieces. Diana watched as shards fell into the grass. The wings she had worn since her birth were gone. She would never be able to fly again. She would never be able to soar beside the birds. She would never be able to go back home. The last thought burned right into her spirit. Right into her. Oh no, the boy screeched. I broke them. He stamped his feet and cursed, same words inappropriate for his age, and suffered his tantrum. Diana watched the wind drift through the grass, carrying those tiny fine shards of her wings away until nothing retained. Absolutely nothing. Diana struggled to her knees. Her body felt cold, but something terrible burned inside her. Something truly terrible. Something she'd never felt before. It burned her heart. It burned her eyes. It burned everything. She thought the grass would set alight if she were not careful. It's not fair, the boy spluttered as he kicked the ground. As Diana slowly rose to her feet, the boy snapped, I want another pair of wings. I already told you. Diana's voice was soft. No anger, no frustration. A fairy can only ever have one pair of wings in their lifetime, and you broke mine. The boy swore and crossed his arms madly. His furious features softened to realize that didn't count as my wish, and I still have one wish to use, right? Of course, child, Diana said. She lifted her head, her eyes gleamed with an unnatural violet. Tell me your deepest wish, and I'll give it to you. He closed his eyes and thought. I've got it, the boy said. I've got it. I have to sleep with Mum and Dad because I'm so scared. I want to wish my fear away. That sounds like a terrible fear, Diana said. She stood straight, wincing in pain. Do you know that most fears gradually disappear when you have to face them every day? I don't want to face mine every day, the boy gibed and piped up. I want it gone now. Very well. Diana smiled, but first I must tell you one thing. What's that? As a fairy, I must make your chosen wish come true. It's a rule. However, I can decide exactly how your wish will play out. Yeah, so what? Diana chuckled. Her body shuddered slightly. Are you sure you don't want to be afraid of the dark anymore? Yes, that's my exact wish. Are you deaf, fairy? Are you deaf? Please kneel and lean down towards me. The boy kneeled and lowered his head. He asked like this. That's perfect. I can reach you perfectly from here, Diana grinned. Now I'll make your wish come true. With a flash of magic, a needle appeared in Diana's hand. She stabbed each of the boy's eyes, plucking them out and throwing them into the grass. The boy shrieked, clutching his empty sockets as blood dribbled down his cheeks and chin. Why? He screamed hysterically. Why did you do this? You don't want to be afraid of the dark anymore, Diana said coolly. She wiped the blood off the needle. If you live every day in the dark, your fear will eventually dissolve in time. You will no longer be afraid. You took my eyes, he wailed. You took my eyes. Yes, I did, Diana scolded. You should be careful what you wish for, little boy. Of course, by the time the boy's parents ran outside to see what all the fuss was about, Diana had limped to the fence. She passed one of the boy's bloody eyes and nudged it down a hole. She hoped it would make a tasty snack for a pest. She watched the parents try to comfort the boy, whose eyes were lost. Now Diana understood why fairies never travelled out anymore. In centuries past, children appreciated the appearance of a kind fairy. Fairies could cure their hunger, loneliness, or misery. The world had changed, and it seemed as though children did not suffer such ailments anymore. Instead, they possessed an insatiable greed. A greed that had cost Diana everything. Without her wings, Diana knew she would never be able to return home. It was doubtful that she would ever see another fairy again. She was trapped here. She closed her eyes and accepted her fate. If she was going to be trapped in a human world forever, she would simply have to remind children that fairies were to be respected, or they would have to be taught a lesson. The end. And that is called A Dark Fairy Tale. Very different indeed, and very interesting. I like how it turned out. An eye for an eye, so they say. Many blessings. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Wisteria here. I wasn't sure on what I actually wanted to do next. I decided I wanted to do Draak von Stella collection, or Stoller, Draak von Stoller collection. And this is Curse of the Evil Fairies Fort. Patrick and Sophia O'Brien were direct descendants of a cursed family. When the tales of fairies were very much real and feared among many Irish families abroad, this is when they were cursed. Patrick and Sophia only knew of the tales that they were told by their parents and were not directly affected by the superstitions. They didn't believe in any of them. Patrick and Sophie would joke, about the evil fairies that lived on forts just miles from where they lived. The children's father would tell bedtime stories to their children. Seamus, that was one of the children, of course, Niall, and Anne. The children often had nightmares about fairies, taking their souls and coming back as a changeling to torment their family, then die after that, with their parents never realising that it isn't actually their child. As the children got a little older, their fear of fairies seems to fade away. One day, the children got the courage to take a trip, let's say, to the fairies. They wanted to find the fort and put their concerns to rest about these evil fairy tales their parents told them when they were too young to distinguish between fantasy and reality. Seamus was the older of the three children and the bravest, so it was evident that he would be the one to lead them through the evil fairy's fort. Anne, well, she was the youngest and usually the most frightened, but she knew her older brothers would take good care of her. They wouldn't let anything happen to her. The children proceeded to sneak out of the house when all of a sudden their mother, Sophie, stopped them dead in their tracks and said, "Where do you think you're going?" The children replied, "To riding our bikes through the trails. We'll make sure we'll be back before sundown." Their mother said, "Please be careful, and you better all be back for dinner." Seamus replied, "Don't worry, Mum. We'll be right on time for dinner. That's a promise." "Okay, now hurry along. I made cookies and hot apple pie for dessert," said Sophie. The children got on their bikes and pedalled down the road to the evil fairy's fort. Finally, after about an hour of riding down the road, they reacted their destiny and made a change. Towards the evil fairy's fort, of course. "There is no such place," said Niall. "Look at this place. It is creepy looking." "I definitely wouldn't want to live here," exclaimed Anne. "Well, since we're here, who wants to go first?" said Seamus. "I do," replied Neil, spelt Niall. It is Neil, though to look at it you'd think it were Niall, but it's Neil. Neil entered into the fort and felt as though someone was watching him. "Is anyone feeling that feeling right now?" said Neil. Anne and Seamus laughed at Neil. "All I feel is a cool breeze. Nothing unusual," laughed Seamus. Anne chimed in and said, "Neil, don't talk like that. Are you trying to scare me?" "I don't want to be scared, and I'm not scared, and you know I scare very easily." "No, I'm not kidding. I felt like someone is watching me," said Neil. "I want to go home," cried Anne. "Oh, it's probably nothing. Let's stick together. It's best to do that. Not separate from one another," said Seamus. Seamus laughed and said, "I don't believe this is a fairy fort." Then Seamus found a metal pipe on the ground and started shouting and swinging its metal with great force, descending to the evil fairy fort. Seamus was in for a big surprise. Each swing of the metal pipe against the fort just angered the fairies even more, as he started to smash it against the fairy fort wall. The evil fairies had seen enough, and it was time to let these kids know and teach them a lesson. All of a sudden, there was a blinding light so bright it lit up the whole fort. The children couldn't find their way out. They were very frightened. All the children could hear were evil fairies' voice telling them their souls were being taken right before their very eyes. And when they return home, they will be changelings. The evil fairy explained to the children that when you return home, you will whine and screech and consistently irritate your parents. Also, you will have an appetite that can't be satisfied. If any one of you survive, you will be rejected by all fairies, and you will no longer belong to your parents. If you die, your parents will never realize you aren't their child. Now go and do your evil deeds, because your souls no longer belong to you," laughed the wicked fairies. The bright light diminished. The fairy vanished before their eyes, and the possessed children left the fort, got on their bikes and headed for home to torment their parents. The children's eyes were red as fire, hearts pounding out of their chests and whining as they pedaled their way back home. Now that evil thoughts were in their minds, they were ready to turn their once beloved home into a demon house. It was getting dark outside, and their dinner was getting cold, and the parents were worried sick something terrible might have happened. And, well, they were right. As the children approached their home, Sophie was looking out of Anne's bedroom window on the second level of the house, hoping she would see the children on the way and that they would show up very soon. Sophie said, "Look, I can see them, but something is wrong. Am I imagining things? Are their eyes red as fire? And I can also hear a whining noise." Her husband got out of the chair and came to the window. "Do you see what I see?" said Sophie. "No, I do not. You're just imagining things," said Patrick. "I know what I saw was not my imagination. Our children's eyes were red as fire, and I could have sworn the whining came from them," said Sophie. "Nonsense," said Patrick. "What you need is to calm down, and when you see the children, their eyes won't be red, and they won't be whining either. You're just letting the evil fairy superstition get the best of you. As long as we've lived in this house, we've never encountered anything out of the ordinary, and especially, well, there's been no evil fairies lurking either. Not in the woods, and not out there, not in here, not our house. Now let's drop the whole thing, and you'll see I'm right," said Patrick in a stern voice. The children got off their bikes, ran into the house, sat down at the dinner table, and tore into the cold food like a bunch of wild animals. Sophie and Patrick ran down to the stairs to confront the children as to why they were so late. Before they could scold the children, all three children turned their heads towards their parents, with eyes red as fire. They started whining and screeching and screeching and whining. "What is wrong with our little darlings?" cried Sophie to Patrick. "Is this some joke? It isn't amusing," said Patrick. He was getting angry. "I want you all to get up from the table, go into the living room, and I want some answers," said Patrick. "What's the matter, Daddy?" "Don't like the way your little darlings are acting," laughed the children. "Daddy, why don't you and Mummy go to your room and don't come out until we say you can?" giggled Anne. "That's it, you're all grounded for a week," yelled Patrick. The children just laughed, threw their plates on the floor, ran upstairs to their room. Sophie started crying, saying the fairies have stolen their souls, and I'll never get them back. "What will we do, Patrick?" "I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give them all a good spanking. That's what I need to do. I'll learn them a lesson that way. I am very upset with them. Very upset," said Patrick, and as he did, his voice was getting angrier and angrier. "Patrick, my darling, please don't spank the kids. They are changelings. And now that we see with our own eyes the tales our parents told us we were children were true, well, we would have stopped this from happening. We should have, before it got this far. Patrick, let's lock their doors, and in the morning call the priest to bless our house and perform an exorcism on our children. Maybe this will bring our children's souls back from wherever the fairies are keeping them. We want to live as normal, not like this. Not like this." Surprise! Now you know an exorcism should be out of question because everyone that has ever come in contact with the evil fairies has rarely survived, and there's about a 1% chance of survival. And if they do survive, then they are shunned by the evil fairies and their own families. As much as I hate to say this, there is no cure for children like this, and we'll probably be burying them, all of them, by the end of the week," said Patrick. "No, I won't let you talk like that about our children. No, there has to be a way out of the curse, and I won't rest until I find a cure." "Okay, then Sophie, go ahead and do what you need to do. But in reality, you will see that I was right all along," said Patrick. Sophie stomped out of the room and slept on the couch the remainder of the night. She prayed and wept all through the night that God would intervene and save the children's souls. She wanted them safe from the evil fairy's curse. All that was heard in the O'Brien's house that night was whining and screaming at the children's bedroom doors. Finally, morning came. Sophie got in her car and drove as fast as she could to beg her preacher to go to her house and save her children from evil fairies. But the curse was too strong for any mortal to break. As Sophie's car sped down the road, she noticed something very, very wrong. As her vehicle passed the houses on her street, her car wasn't making any headway. All the houses were the same, and she just ended up in the same spot, right in front of her own house. Sophie stopped her car, put her head in her hands and wept uncontrollably. Sophie's husband walked up to the car and knocked on the driver's side window, and Sophie rolled down the window. Patrick asked her, "What's going on? I thought you were driving to bring a preacher to the house." "I was, but as I was driving down the road, I got nowhere. I kept seeing the same houses on our street. It's as though some force was keeping me from getting to my destination. I know I was gone for over an hour, and you can't tell me this is as far as I got," cries Sophie. "Sophie, I don't know what's going on, but get out of the car and let me go and get the preacher," said Patrick. "Please hurry, Patrick. There's not much time left." Patrick sped off down the road. As Sophie was walking up the steps to the front door of the house, turned to wave goodbye to her husband, the car exploded, killing Patrick instantly. Sophie ran down the steps, screaming and screaming at the top of her lungs. "Why did you evil fairies kill my Patrick?" Sophie dropped to her knees and asked God not to let the fairies harm her children. "If you want to take someone, take me. Please, please don't take the children. They've done nothing to hurt the fairies," cried Sophie. But Sophie was wrong about the children. They did anger the evil fairies because Seamus destroyed the wicked fairy's fort with his metal pipe. Though to them it did not look like it was being destroyed, it actually was. The evil fairies forewarned her children that if anyone desecrates their fortress, they will surely die, along with any family members. Sophie's whole world came crashing down in 20 hours. Sophie said to herself, "If I don't get a grip, I'll surely lose the children too, and I don't want that to happen." Sophie ran back to the house to call the police, but all she got was a busy signal. So she ran to the neighbour's house to use their phone. Sophie knocked on the door, and an evil fairy answered the door and said, "It's too late. The children's souls, they are mine. By the time you reach them, they will all be dead. Then you'll be taken back to the fairies' fort, where you will be locked inside forever as an evil hag. I will let you see your children as they take their last breath. Then you will be whisked away to the evil fairy's fort, where you'll spend eternity as an evil hag, to scare off any intruders that try to defile the fort." Sophie's tears were pouring down her cheeks as she walked inside her house to see her children for the last time. All she could hear was their whining. Sophie decided, since she lost her husband and was going to miss her children and spend an eternity as an evil hag, she wasn't about to give the evil fairies this satisfaction. So she went upstairs to her room, opened the top dresser drawer, and pulled out Patrick's revolver, then loaded the gun, went to the children's room, kissed her dying children on their foreheads until there was no life in them, then pointed the gun straight at her head. She pulled the trigger. Sophie fell to the ground. The O'Brien family was no more, and after the townspeople found out what had happened to the O'Briens, the townspeople built a concrete wall around the evil fairy's fort to keep out curious lookers. Finally, the townspeople could rest easy and not have to live in fear, wondering when the evil fairies would wreak havoc on their town. The end. And that is the full story. I like how they're short like that, but it's kind of good. of the evil fairy curse and the evil fairy fort. Thank you for listening, and many blessings. Wisteria, energy, twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to the next urban legend by Drac von Stoller. The clown statue is this urban legend. Dan and Brenda Stevens finally planned a night out without the kids, were able to find a babysitter at the last minute. Brenda's friend, Karen's daughter Susan, happened to be free for the evening because her boyfriend was sick. So instead of being stuck home all night with nothing to do, her mother suggested she babysat her friend Brenda's kids and make a little extra money. Susan was happy to earn some easy money for a couple of hours. Susan got ready, said goodbye to her mother, and drove to Stephen's house for what she thought would be a quiet night and some easy babysitting money. Instead, it was going to be a night of terror. Susan finally arrived at Stephen's house as the rain was pouring down. Susan knocked on Stephen's door, and Dan and Brenda greeted her and told her after she put the kids to bed she could watch TV in their bedroom because the TV in the living room wasn't working. Susan said no problem. She told them to have a good time, not to worry about the kids, and she would take good care of them. The Stevens ran out in the pouring rain to their car, the Stevens, last family name. They drove to their restaurant that the husband had picked out. Susan played a few games with the kids, and when it got to 8 o'clock, told them it was time for bed. She read them a bedtime story and said goodnight to them, turned out their bedroom light, and got some soda from the refrigerator, went back upstairs to watch TV until the Stevens returned from their dinner date. Susan sat down and turned on the TV via remote, flipping through the channels, and popped the top off the soda can. Just as she touched her lips to the soda can to take a drink, she said to herself, "That's odd. What is a creepy-looking clown statue doing in their bedroom? It doesn't even look like it belongs here." Susan just brushed it off as maybe the Stevens got it as a gift from one of their friends and couldn't say no to their kind gesture. After about 15 minutes, Susan got up and went to use the restroom. And she was sitting on the toilet. She heard a noise and said, "Kids, you better not be up. Just because I'm your babysitter doesn't mean you can get away with murder." Susan went into the children's bedroom and softly called out their names, but they were fast asleep. She even went over to their beds and nudged them, but they just squirmed around a bit. Susan went back to Mr. and Mrs. Stevens' room to finish off watching TV until they arrived back home. Susan again looked at the clown statue and did a double take and said, "I could have sworn the clown statue was not there a minute ago." She began to get a little nervous and decided to give Stevens a call about their clown statue. "Hello, Mr. Stevens speaking. Mr. Stevens, this clown statue in your bedroom is creeping me out," exclaimed Susan in a nervous voice. "What clown statue?" replied Mr. Stevens. Then screams from Susan rang through the receiver of his phone, and then silence. There was nothing Mr. Stevens could do about it. Mr. Stevens was worried something was wrong. He feared for the children's safety and the babysitter and immediately dialed 911. Mr. Stevens and his wife ran to their car and sped down the road as fast as they could, fearing the unknown. When the police officers entered Stevens' residence, they smelled fresh, burning, entered the kitchen, and got the shock of their lives. The 2 children and the babysitter's heads were in a pot boiling on the stove. The clown statue said, "I'm sorry, but I only have enough to go around with 3 people, and there are 5 of us." The police told the clown statue to freeze, but he just kept stirring the heads in the boiling water. Then he dropped the spoon, put his hands in the air, and the police apprehended him and placed him in handcuffs, then escorted him to the squad car. As the Stevens arrived at their house, 2 police officers had to subdue them because of the horrific scene inside their home. Mr. Stevens was screaming out, "Where are my babies?" And the officer said, as he choked back the words, "They're dead. They're dead. I'm so sorry." They were told that Susan's cell had suddenly turned into screams on the call, and when the police arrived, they found her lifeless body on the floor of their bedroom, right beside the clown statue. Panic and disbelief consumed Dan and Brenda. They were devastated, not only for the loss of the young girls, but their 2 young children were also dead, which would be wounds deep enough. I mean, that would take years of therapy and probably never heal. As the investigation unfolded, the police pieced together a chilling sequence of events. The rain-soaked night had masked the intruder's approach. He'd been hiding in the shadows, silently moving through the house, biding his time. When Susan had gone to use the restroom, that's when he made his move. The intruder, a man with a history of violent crimes, had been fixated on the Stevens home. He had, somehow, managed to acquire a clown costume, using it as a disguise to infiltrate the house. His intention was clear: to create chaos and instill fear. As the investigation continued, more details emerged about the man's motives and criminal history. It was revealed that he had been responsible for a series of gruesome murders, each carried out with a level of cruelty and sent shivers down the spines of even the seasoned detectives. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and the case took a dark turn when it was revealed that the clown costume had been used in previous crimes. The trial was intense and emotionally charged. The man showed no remorse for his actions, and his defense was filled with attempts to shift blame and create doubt. However, the evidence presented by the prosecution was damning. The jury's decision was swift: guilty on all counts. The judge, considering the heinous nature of the crimes, sentenced him to death. Dan and Brenda struggled to cope with the aftermath of that horrific night. The trauma ran deep, and their home, once a place of comfort, now held haunting memories. The loss of Susan and their 2 children put a huge hole in their hearts that would take many years to heal. The story of that fateful night served as a chilling reminder of the darkness that could lurk even in the most ordinary of places. It was a cautionary tale that left the community shaken but vigilant. The Stevens family, forever scarred by the tragedy, wished they could turn back time, but knew that was impossible. Lessons to be learned: that you may want to check all windows and doors. Make sure they are locked before you head out into the night. If you don't, there might just be a clown statue somewhere in your house, waiting for the opportunity to kill and send fear into the hearts of the townspeople for years to come, until you, of course, heed this warning. The end. And that is the urban legend of the clown statue. Although I did notice that apparently when the police broke down the door, right, it said they found the clown stirring the heads in the pot. Yet it said when the Stevens got there, or whoever got there, it also says something about finding the babysitter's body at the side of the clown statue. So did the police go in, find the babysitter's body first, leave the house to start cordoning it off, and then went back in and found the clown that they thought was a statue, then stirring the heads in the pot? I don't know. I'm trying to make sense of that, because if you actually listen to the story, it does state that the police found the clown stirring the heads in the pot, right? And he just put his hands up and were arrested. But a little bit further down it says there was a scream on the phone, and when they got there they found the babysitter's body at the side of the clown statue. So that it's either a mistake or something, I don't know. It doesn't make sense, does it, right? Well, it doesn't to me anyway. When you think about it, it's like a mistake in the story or something. But anyway, that's probably a well-known urban legend by many people. But there you go. Thank you for listening and many blessings. Hello, everyone, whether you're listening on YouTube or on my podcast, thank you so very much. This is the urban legend. Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light? By Drac von Stoller. Meg was happy to have the chance their other sisters didn't. She was finally going to college. Meg's sisters helped her move into a new dorm. Her sisters were introduced to her roommate, Samantha. Meg and Samantha got along well. They helped each other in their studies. Samantha needed the most help with her homework because she did like to party, and Meg always had her head in the textbooks. Midterms were just around the corner, and a big party was at a good friend of Samantha's house, and of course, Samantha wasn't going to miss the party over a midterm exam. Samantha said, Meg, there is a party at one of my friend's house, and there's a guy I'd really like you to meet. What do you say? You want to come, or are you going to stay inside this boring dorm studying all weekend? Well, it sure sounds tempting, but I want to keep an average at A in every class, replied Meg. Okay, Meg, but this guy is adorable, said Samantha. I'm sure he is. You go on and have a good time at the party, and thanks anyway for the invitation. That was kind of you to think of me, Meg replied. Samantha went to the party and to ride back at the dorm until after midnight. Samantha opened the door to the dorm room and noticed it was pitch black inside, but she was too drunk and too tired to turn on the light switch, so she went to bed. The next morning, Samantha looked at her alarm clock and it said, well, she was late. Oh my God, it's afternoon. I've missed all my midterms. She noticed Meg was still in bed and thought that was odd. She wasn't at her midterm exams. Samantha got out of bed and came over to wake up Meg, but she didn't move. Samantha said, quit playing around. We're going to be in big trouble for missing some of our exams. Samantha pulled the covers off her head and screamed. There was a pool of blood in her bed. Her limbs were hacked off. Then Samantha looked at the wall beside the bed and noticed red writing on the wall. She went over and touched the writing and screamed again and said, It's blood. Then she read the message on the wall in tears. It said, aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light? In the days that followed, the news of Meg's horrifying death spread like wildfire through the campus, as you would expect it to. The once lively dormitory became a place of whispers and trepidation. The tragedy was met with shock and sorrow, and it sent ripples of fear among the students. The legend, once just an urban tale, seemed to have manifested itself in the most gruesome way imaginable. Samantha, traumatized by the loss of her roommate and the terrifying message scrawled on the wall, struggled to come to terms with the reality of what had happened. The guilt of going to the party and leaving Meg alone in the dorm that night weighed heavily on her conscience. She became withdrawn and haunted. Her nights were with nightmares, her days spent trying to piece together the events leading up to Meg's death. As the campus community mourned, some students were more affected than others. A few girls in the dormitory claimed to have heard strange noises and seen fleeting shadows in the hallway during the night. Rumours began to circulate that Meg's spirit was seeking revenge, that her death had been the result of some otherworldly force tied to a chilling legend. In the midst of this turmoil, a team of paranormal investigators arrived on campus. They had heard about the tragic events and were determined to uncover the truth behind the legend and Meg's untimely demise. Armed with their equipment, they conducted thorough investigations of the dormitory, looking for any signs of paranormal activity, explanations that went beyond the surface. The investigators delved into the history of the campus, digging up accounts of similar incidents that had occurred in the past. They discovered tales of students who had mysteriously vanished or met gruesome fates. Stories that often had been dismissed as mere urban legends. As they pieced together the puzzle, they realized that there was a pattern of darkness. It seemed to reoccur every few years. The investigators interviewed Samantha and other students who had experienced strange occurrences. They listed their stories of unexplained noises, eerie whispers, and shadowy figures. Samantha recounted the message scrawled on the wall, her discovery of Meg's brutalized body. The investigators knew they were dealing with something more complex and sinister than a simple urban legend. As they continued their research, they uncovered a connection between the victims and the campus itself. There were rumours of an old ritual that had been performed by secret societies. This was decades ago. A ritual meant to summon a malevolent presence that fed on fear and darkness. Could this ritual had inadvertently unleashed a force that continued to plague the campus? The investigators organised a late-night vigil in the haunted dormitory, hoping to make contact with whatever entity may be responsible for the tragedies. They set up their equipment, including audio recorders, cameras. They called out to the spirit, inviting it to communicate. The atmosphere was tense as they waited, but their senses heightened by the powerful energy in the air. As the night deepened, the investigators began to experience strange phenomena. Cold spots, unexplained drafts, inexplicable sounds filled the dormitory. The audio recorders picked up faint whispers, as if the very walls were trying to convey a message. Suddenly a presence seemed to manifest, and the investigators felt an otherworldly weight in the room. Using their equipment, the investigators attempted to communicate with the spirit. Through a series of yes or no questions, they learned that the malevolent entity had indeed been unleashed by an old ritual and had been feeding on fear and despair ever since. It was drawn to places of darkness and had been responsible for the tragedies that had occurred on campus over the years. The investigators, armed with this knowledge, devised a plan to confront the entity and put an end to its reign of terror. They performed a ritual of their own, meant to banish the malevolent presence from the campus. As they chanted and invoked positive energy, the atmosphere in the dormitory shifted. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive energy seemed to recede. Days turned into weeks, and the campus began to heal. The once haunted dormitory slowly regained a sense of normalcy. The investigators' efforts had worked. The malevolent entity that had plagued the campus for years was gone. The legend of the "aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light" message became a chilling reminder of the darkness that could befall those who dared to delve into the supernatural. Samantha, though scared by the events, found solace in the support of her friends and the knowledge that the entity's reign of terror had ended. As the campus community came together to remember the victims, honour their memories, a renewed sense of unity and resilience took root. And while the legend remained, it became more of a cautionary tale of the dangers that lurk in the shadows and the importance of confronting darkness with courage and pure determination. Light outdoes the dark. Always remember that. Thank you for listening to this urban legend tale. Please hit the like, share if you can, and if you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Many blessings. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Whether you're listening on YouTube or the podcast, thank you very much. This is an urban legend. Humans can like too. Bedtime Stories. Part 1. A fateful night. Today was an exciting day for Kathy. because it was the first day her parents felt they could trust her to stay at home by herself. They could finally have a night to themselves and stay out late, but they had no idea their choice would cost their daughter's life. Kathy reassured them she would be okay by herself and felt even more safe because she had her dog to keep her company. Her mother asked her if she would be okay for a few hours alone, and Kathy said, "Just go, enjoy yourselves. I'll see you soon." Her father said, "Let's go. Don't worry, she's old enough to be on her own now." "Well, all right. Let's go," said her mother. As her parents left, Kathy waved goodbye, feeling a lump forming in her throat. She hugged her dog tightly, seeking comfort in his warm fur. She'd always been grateful for his companionship, but now she felt as though he was a lifeline. She knew that with him by her side, she would be able to make it through the weekend. Part 2. The Storm and Disappearance. As the storm began to rage outside, Kathy settled down on the couch, turning on a movie to distract herself from the howling wind and the rain. Her dog curled up beside her, his breathing steadied and reassuring. As the night wore on, Kathy began to feel drowsy. She drifted off to sleep. It was only when she woke up that she realized her dog was gone. Panic set in as she searched the house and calling out his name, but there was no response. She searched every room, her heart racing, but he was nowhere to be found. She knew that she had to keep looking, but exhaustion had set in. She was struggling to keep her eyes open. Eventually, she gave up the search and crawled into bed, feeling alone and vulnerable. She left the door to her bedroom slightly open, hoping that her dog would find his way back to her. But as she drifted off to sleep, she heard a faint, dripping noise coming from the bathroom. She tried to ignore it, telling herself that it was just the rain outside. But it persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Feeling uneasy, Kathy got out of bed and walked over to the bathroom. The faucet was dripping, so she turned it off, relieved that she had found the source of the noise. But as she turned to leave, she felt a chill run down her spine. Something wasn't right. She couldn't quite put a finger on it, but she had a sense of foreboding. Part 3. The Horrifying Discovery. As she walked back to her bedroom, she reached down to pet her dog, only to find he wasn't there. Panic set in as she searched the room, but he was nowhere to be found. It was only when she noticed a faint sound coming from under the bed that she realized something was wrong. As she peered under the bed, her heart stopped. There, hanging from a cord, was her dog. She screamed, recoiling in horror as she read the note that was attached to him. Humans can lick too. Suddenly, Kathy heard a noise coming from outside. Her heart racing, she stumbled towards the front door, desperate to escape, but it was too late. The escaped convict was waiting for her, and before she could even scream, he had grabbed her and dragged her back into the house. Part 4. The investigation unravels. As Kathy's parents returned home, they found the house in disarray. Their daughter was nowhere to be found, and their beloved dog was dead. They were devastated, knowing only if they had stayed home, this tragedy could have been avoided. As the police investigated the scene, they uncovered the chilling details of what had happened. An escaped convict had been lurking outside the house, waiting for his chance to strike. He had used Kathy's fear of being alone to his advantage, luring her into a false sense of security before launching his attack. Part 5. Coping with loss and lessons learned. For Kathy's parents, the guilt was overwhelming. They left their daughter vulnerable and alone. Now she was gone. They vowed never to leave her alone again, but it was too late. All they had left was, what if? In the wake of Kathy's tragic death, Her parents became advocates for child safety. They worked tirelessly to spread awareness about the dangers of leaving children home alone, the importance of keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. Kathy's story became an urban legend in the town. Parents wanted their children to be warned about the dangers of being alone, to be cautious of strangers. The legend of humans can lick too served as a haunting reminder of consequences of complacency and the importance of prioritizing safety. In the years that followed, Kathy's parents established a foundation in her memory, focusing on child safety initiatives and providing support to families who had lost loved ones to violence. They hoped that through their efforts, they could prevent other families from experiencing the same heartbreak they had endured. As the years passed, of course, the legend that humans can lick too continued to be passed down from generation to generation. It's like a grim cautionary tale that served as a reminder that danger could lurk, even in the most unexpected places. Kathy's legacy lived on, not only in the hearts of her grieving parents, but also in countless lives that were touched by her story. And though the pain of her loss would never truly fade, her memory became sort of a beacon of hope, inspiring others to be vigilant, cherish their loved ones, and work together to create a safer world for everyone. Of course, what you're probably wondering is why it skipped the most important part. Well, that's because the urban legend comes from this particular story. The part that it missed out is that when she turns the faucet, and it's like these are the parts added in that made it the urban legend, I guess, but basically, when she hears the noise and she turns the faucet off and she feels a bit weird, she decides to hide under a bed because she feels alone and not safe. That part's missing out of the story because whether it actually happened or not is not known. But as in the urban legend as it goes, she hid under the bed because she was scared, she was alone and she was hearing noises. Now, another part it missed out was the previous night, where she fell asleep on the bed exhausted from searching for the dog, only to feel her dog licking her hand. So it did miss a couple of points out, but that's the urban legend of it. So the urban legend story that's told goes like this. Young girl left alone for the weekend, her parents out on a business convention. She has a dog, feels very comforted because she's got the dog obviously. And one particular night, late night, she's getting ready to go to bed and she can't seem to find the dog anywhere. She's shouting the dog and they do live in a fairly big farmhouse. So eventually she just collapses on bed and falls to sleep. Now, partway into the night, she feels the dog licking her hand. So she's extremely comforted because obviously a dog's licking her hand, so she knows now a dog's under the bed. And then she falls back to sleep, and then again she's woken up by a dripping sound in the bathroom. When she goes to the bathroom to check on the dripping sound, her dog is hanging in the bath shower area. The dog has been mutilated. The dripping sound is the dripping of blood onto the bathtub, as it makes that echoey sound. And when she sees the writing on the wall, it says, humans can lick too. So she obviously runs, and the first place she runs to is under a bed to hide, completely forgetting, the part where her hand was licked. And she disappears, never to be seen again. Or she's murdered in a brutal form. That's the urban legend of it, but the story actually comes from sort of something similar, but the facts are not really known about it, if you get what I mean, because it was so long ago or whatever. But you can look into it, and I think it comes up with like 6 or 7 different stories humans can lick to. But I just thought it was odd because this particular story leaves out the main part of it, and I didn't get why. Do you know why, guys? Why would the story leave out the main part of it? Seems a little odd to me, and I'm just curious what you think too. But thank you for taking the time to listen to this one. I found it interesting because it left the main part out, I think. So, yeah. Please hit the like, share if you can, and if you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Many blessings. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for tuning in, whether it be on YouTube or the podcast. I appreciate it. Another urban legend, The Babysitter and the Man Upstairs, again by Drac von Stoller, so we may find that it's told a little differently than what it normally would be. But let's get into it, shall we? Jamie was thumbing through the newspaper in search of a weekend job for the summer. She was 16 years old and needed the extra money to help save for textbooks when she started school in the fall. She tossed the newspaper on the floor, frustrated with no results. Then one of the newspaper pages flipped over to the last page as a classified. And there, in small print, babysitter needed for the summer. She said, "How did I miss this? Maybe I was skimming over it. Maybe because I was going too fast." Jamie called the number, and a middle-aged woman answered and said, "May I help you?" "Yes, you can. I'm interested in the babysitting job, but wasn't sure if this was like an everyday thing or the weekends only," asked Jamie. "I'm sorry, but I meant to put weekends only, but I was in a hurry," explained the woman. "If you're looking to babysit every day, I apologize for any inconvenience that may have caused you," said the woman. No, this is what I wanted. When can I start?" asked Jamie. "Well, you can start next weekend around 5 p.m, asked the woman. "That sounds perfect. I'll see you then," replied Jamie. Jamie hung up the phone and was excited about having a summer job. That would ease her mind about how she was going to be able to pay for her textbooks. The week passed by like a rocket, and it was Saturday. Jamie showed up at her babysitting job right on time. She knocked on the front woman's door, and the woman opened the door and said, "You must be Jamie. It's so nice to see you." The woman introduced her children to Jamie and told her she would be back by 6 p.m. on Sunday night. The woman said bye to Jamie and her kids then. She got in a car and drove to a business trip. Jamie played some games with the children, then the phone rang. Jamie picked up the phone and said, "Who's there?" And all she heard was heavy breathing. She hung up the phone and went back to playing games with the children. Jamie checked her watch and said, "Oh my, it's 8 p.m. How time flies when you're having fun. Well, children, it's time for bed." Jamie escorted the children upstairs to the bedroom that they shared. She read them a story. A few minutes later, the children were fast asleep. Jamie got up out of the bed and then turned the light out. She went downstairs to watch TV before going to sleep. As Jamie was eating popcorn and watching a movie called Halloween, it started storming outside. Scary movies scare the willies out of her, but she still liked watching them anyway. The phone started to ring, and so she picked it up again and said, "Hello?" An eerie voice said, "Have you checked on the children lately?" "Who is this?" she said. Then the caller hung up the phone. Jamie just thought it was someone calling like random numbers and playing a prank. Jamie just kept watching the scary movie. The phone rang again, and she picked it up and said, "Hello." This time the caller was persistent on her checking on the children upstairs. Jamie was starting to get nervous, so she put her popcorn down on the coffee table, headed upstairs to check on the children. When she opened their bedroom door and turned on the light, she screamed bloody murder. The children were dead, and the man said, "I told you to check on the children, didn't I?" Jamie screamed and ran out of the bedroom to call the police. But the axe-wielding man wasn't about to let her reach the phone. He ran downstairs as she was screaming. Then as she put her hand on the receiver, the axe split her skull wide open. Poor Jamie lay on the floor, dead in a pool of blood. The man pulled the axe out of her head and started chopping her into a million pieces. As he was giving her the axe, he said, "I thought I told you to check on the children, and you didn't." Now you're all dead. All dead because of it. The axe-wielding man laughed an eerie laugh, and took his bloody axe with him and slipped out into the stormy night, leaving a bloody mess behind for the police to clean up. When the owner arrived home by 6 p.m. on Sunday, she got the shock of her life. The two most influential people in her life were dead, and the babysitter that was supposed to keep them safe while she was gone was also dead. If the babysitter would have only did what the man upstairs told her to do, maybe her children would still be alive. I guess we'll never know. What if in this tragic story? The end. Thank you for listening to this urban legend. I'm sure you've all heard it 1,000 times, but, they're still good, right? Please hit the like, share if you can, and if you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Many blessings. Wisteria, energy, twister. Wisteria, energy, twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and the Tales from Drac von Stoller. This one's called Chainsaw. Bill and Sharon Timmons were heading down the highway to what was supposed to be the most significant moment in their lives, but ran out of gas in the pouring rain just miles from their honeymoon destination. As Bill pulled his car off the side of the road, Sharon was getting nervous and antsy about what they're going to do now. Sharon said in a worried voice, "Honey, where are we? Why did you pass our exit, which was 10 miles in the other direction?" "Sorry, honey. I just thought this road was take us back in the right direction," replied Bill. "That's why you were supposed to use the GPS, stupid," said Sharon. "I'm not stupid. I'll get us out of this mess," exclaimed Bill. As Bill was dialing the AAA service to give him roadside assistance, his cell phone died. "What are we going to do now, genius?" asked Sharon. "Calm down. I'll get help. I'm sure there's a house close by," said Bill in a stern voice. "Bill, please hurry," said Sharon in a scared voice. Bill kissed his new bride on the cheek and set out in the pouring rain to find help. Just moments later, a tow truck pulled alongside Bill's broken-down car, with his beautiful new bride all alone in the car, scared stiff. One of the men got out of the vehicle named Bubba, while his brother Joe stayed in the truck. Bubba came over to the driver's side window and knocked. Sharon rolled down the window and said, "Thank God you're here to help. Me and my husband got our car. We need to get it fixed." Sharon had no idea her husband didn't send these men in the tow truck, but they played along with her, telling her not to worry, they would take care of everything. She also had no idea that her husband was already dead. Bill found help, all right, but not at the right house. The men let Bill inside their filthy shack, only to tie him down to their kitchen table and cut his body into pieces with a chainsaw. These men were ready to give the new bride the scare of her life before they lowered the chainsaw blade to rip her pretty flesh into pieces. One of the men helped the new bride inside their tow truck, while the other hooked the car up to be taken back to their shack for some chainsaw action. Sharon thanked the men for wanting to help them out. The men took a swig of beer and wiped their dirty, unshaven, smelly faces off, and one man said, "All in a day's work, ma'am." As the tow truck was barreling down the gravel road to their shack, one of the men started getting fresh with the new bride, and she said, "What do you think you're doing?" The man said, "It's been a long time since I've been with a woman." Sharon smacked him and said, "Keep your hands to yourself, and if you don't stop, I'll tell my husband, and he won't be pleased about this." The man driving started laughing and said, "Your husband is in no position to do anything right now." "What are you talking about?" asked Sharon. The two men laughed and said, "Let's just say your man is in quite a few pieces." "If you've done something to my husband, I'm going to the police about this," said Sharon in an angry tone. The two men just laughed and finished off their beers as they pulled in front of their shack. "Well, Bubba, I think it's time to show this little lady how we like to have fun in this town." Sharon started screaming. Then Joe jerked her out of the truck and dragged her through the mud and into the shack. Bubba said, "I think she would like to be alone with her husband." Bubba threw her on the bloody kitchen table next to her husband's severed head. She started screaming bloody murder. Then Joe picked up the chainsaw, pulled the cord and waved the chainsaw in the air. As the chainsaw was buzzing, Bubba said, "Joe, let me cut her into pieces. You've got to do her husband." Joe said, "Well, all right. I'll sit back and sip on my beer while the chainsaw's ripping into her flesh. This time, I think we should celebrate by eating their flesh. In the past, we just cut them up and put body parts in trash bags, bury them in the backyard. But, yeah, that sounds like a good idea," replied his brother Bubba. Bubba lowered the buzzing chainsaw down on her body. Ripping away her flesh, she screamed. Blood splattered all over Bubba and the walls. The screams were unbearable for the average person to endure. Bubba and his brother Earl sat down at the bloody kitchen table, eating away at the newlywed's flesh, washing it down with their beer as they laughed. In the following days, the townspeople rallied to find out who did this terrible deed to the couple. The dark events of that night served as a reminder of the dangers that could hide beneath seemingly innocent encounters. Bill and Sharon's story became a testament to the strength of love and resilience in the face of adversity. The mysterious driver and his co-conspirator was eventually apprehended, their sinister motives exposed to the light of justice. The tragedy that had befallen the innocent couple became a lesson that stretched beyond the confines of this small town, serving as a stark reminder that even in the most unexpected moments, darkness could be lurking just beneath the surface. A lesson to be learned: if your woman tells you to stop and ask for directions, do it, because if you don't, you might end up like these two newlyweds, cut into pieces over something that didn't need to happen in the very first place. The end. So, that's an interesting tale. Bit different like, but yeah. Thank you for listening and many blessings. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and the stories of Drac von Stoller. This story is called Killer Dummy. Ted always dreamed that someday he would be a ventriloquist. That day finally arrived on his 50th birthday. One of his closest friends, Bob, decided, since it was the big 5-0, he would make his dream come true. Bob had his eyes on an antique ventriloquist dummy at his aunt's antique shop. He told her to put it on hold so he could surprise his good friend, Ted, at his birthday dinner tomorrow. Bob was excited to be able to make his buddy Ted's dream come true. Bob gave his aunt the money for the dummy and got it gift-wrapped. Bob called Ted on the phone and told him he wanted to take him out for dinner tomorrow. And Ted said, "I'll be there." "I've got a big surprise for you," said Bob. "Thanks, good buddy. I guess I'll see you tomorrow," replied Ted. The day finally arrived, and Ted was having a great time with his buddy Bob. Ted opened his gift and was so excited. "Bob, this is a dream come true. Now I can share it with the world, and I owe you big time." "Don't worry about it. You're my best friend, and I'm just happy I was able to make your dream come true." After dinner was over, the two men shook hands, and Bob said, "You're going to be famous someday, and don't forget me when you do." Ted replied, "Don't worry, I won't." Ted put the dummy back in its box and got in the car and headed off home to practice with the dummy until his eyes were too tired to see. As Ted was driving down the road singing along with the radio, he thought he heard someone call his name. He ignored it and kept singing along with the radio. Then it happened again. The voice said, "Hey, stupid, get me out of this box. I can't breathe." Ted said. I must be losing my mind. I thought I heard a voice coming from the box. That's right, stupid. Now get me out of this box before I kill you. Ted cautiously opened the box. The dummy sat up looking at Ted directly in his eyes and said, You look like you've seen a ghost. Ted swerved to the side of the road. Dummies can't talk. Well, this dummy can talk. Stop the car and listen to what I have to say. You stupid fool. You about got us both killed, said the dummy. I'm going to be the reason your career is going to be a success. When we're on stage together, I will tell you what to do. Got it, stupid, said the dummy. Yeah, I got it, Ted said in a nervous voice. Ted's career took off just like the dummy said it would. Their act was in every major venue, but the dummy had more than laughs on his mind, and one of those things was murder. Ted had a girlfriend. He was very serious about her. The dummy didn't like that one bit. One night, Ted was eating his dinner and the dummy said, Hey, stupid. I wish you'd stop calling me stupid. That bothers me, replied Ted, as his hands were shaking, trying to take a bite of his sandwich. I call you stupid because you look pathetic, and you have the brains of a jackass, claimed the dummy in an angry voice. If you don't stop calling me stupid, I'm going to... You're going to do what? Asked the dummy. You'll see, said Ted. Shut your damn mouth and do as I say, and we'll get along just fine. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to get rid of your girlfriend, demanded the dummy. I can't do that. I love my girlfriend. I want to marry her, explained Ted. Listen here, stupid. If you don't get rid of this blonde bimbo, I will. You wouldn't, said Ted. The dummy laughed and said, Watch me. Ted got angry. Okay, I'll do it. Ted did as the dummy asked, but he chickened out at the last minute. The dummy found out the next morning that Ted chickened out because Ted's girlfriend called his house looking for him to meet her for breakfast at the diner. The dummy never answers the phone, but felt compelled to this time because he just knew Ted would chicken out. The dummy said Ted overslept and wanted to know if he would like to come over to his house and have breakfast with him. Ted's girlfriend said, Who are you? I'm a good friend of Ted's. And I stopped by his house to look at the car because it wouldn't start. Come on over. He's sorry for not showing up and would like to make it up to you, said the dummy. As the dummy was putting down the receiver, Ted asked, Who are you talking to? Your girlfriend. She's coming over for breakfast, laughed the dummy. Just to make sure you don't spoil my plan, I put some sleeping pills in your coffee. Ted's vision was getting blurry, and he tried to get his hands on the dummy, but fell to the floor and passed out. Then someone knocked on his door. The dummy said, Come in, as he sat beside Ted with a butcher's knife behind his back. Ted's girlfriend entered and said, Ted, are you okay? But she got no response. She rushed over to see if he was okay. She tried to wake him, but the dummy put enough sleeping pills in his coffee to keep him down for several hours. As she was crying and holding Ted, the dummy stood up and grabbed the butcher's knife from behind his back and came up from behind and stabbed her several times as the screams echoed throughout the house. The dummy decided Ted was no longer of use to him, so he stabbed Ted to death and placed the butcher's knife in Ted's hand to make it look like a murder-suicide. The dummy said, So long, lovers, as he laughed and got back in his box. Ted's friend Bob heard the news of his friend's passing and was sad that Ted had a short-lived career, but was happy Ted did get to see his dream come true as a ventriloquist. Ted's house was put up for sale. When the new occupants got settled in, they stumbled upon the killer dummy in the attic, who was ready and waiting for the next puzzle to take him out of the box and unleash the evil once again. This killer dummy possesses. The end. And that's the end of that story. Dummies do scare me, I have to admit. Dolls or like ventriloquist dummies absolutely terrify me, and clowns. So yeah, that story. Not good for me. But thank you for listening, and many blessings. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So, this is another Drac von Stoll story. It's called The Dead Body Under the Mattress, and it's actually an urban legend. Bill and Karen Stevens were so excited to get to spend a weekend away from their children. Bill was the top salesman of his company that year and was awarded a weekend trip at any 4-star hotel of his choice. Compliments of the company. Bill and Karen packed their belongings, said goodbye to their children, and headed to the airport to their destination. As their plane took off to the blue skies, Karen said, "Bill, you sure are deserving of this trip, and I'm so happy to share this moment with you." Bill replied, "I am too. I'm very happy to be sharing this moment with the woman of my dreams." They shared a kiss and dozed off as their plane soared through the blue skies to their destination. The plane finally landed, and they were ready for a fun-filled weekend without their kids. Bill and Karen held hands as they approached the front desk of the beautiful 4-star hotel. The man at the front desk said, "Can I help you?" "You can. My wife and I have reservations at this lovely hotel." "Your name, please," asked the man at the front desk. "Bill Stevens." "Ah, yes, suite number 13? The penthouse," replied the man at the front desk. The man at the front desk handed Bill the key to the suite. And Karen got on the elevator with excitement. They were both excited. You could see it on their faces. Their evening of passion slowly turned into horror. Bill put the key in the door, and they both stepped inside their suite. Karen walked over to the bed, laid down and looked around at the beautifully decorated suite. Then a foul odor surrounded her, and she said, "Bill, what is that odor?" Bill replied, "There's probably nothing." Then he got closer to the bed and said, "My God, it smells like something died in this room." Bill immediately phoned the front desk and asked to speak to the manager. Bill told the manager he and his wife were going down to the hotel's restaurant and would be back in an hour or so, and would appreciate it if housekeeping would clean the room and get rid of that foul odor. The manager reassured Bill they would take care of everything. When Bill and his wife came back from dinner, ready to relax, watch TV, once again they entered their suite, and sure enough, when his wife approached the bed, the foul odor was back still. It hadn't gone from the first time, probably. This time, Bill phoned the manager more upset than before. "If you don't get that smell out of our room soon, we want another room." Again, the manager apologized and said housekeeping would go over every inch of the room and take care of the problem. Bill and his wife went down to the gift shop for a little while, then went for a walk to pass the time while the room was getting rid of that foul odor. Well, at least that's what they assumed. After they finished their walk, they went back to the hotel and checked with the man at the front desk to see if their room was ready, and of course he said yes. Bill and his wife entered the room, and once again only to be disappointed. This time Bill had enough and phoned the manager and demanded another place, but they were all booked, and the manager told him he would check other hotels in the area, but they were all booked. Because there, you see, there was a presidential election that was going on. Bill said to his wife, "It looks like we're stuck for the night, but I will search this room from top to bottom." Bill sought all over, but always came back to the bed. So he told his wife to get off the bed. And when Bill took the top of the mattress off, his wife screamed and screamed again at the horrific scene under the mattress. There lay between the mattresses was a headless body, with maggots crawling out of its intestines. Bill and his wife ran out of the suite in horror. They ran out of the hotel without their luggage and got a taxi, headed to the airport to take their next flight home. The decapitated body under the mattress was the body of the woman that was a prostitute. According to a witness, she overheard her and a man fighting over money. The witness was yelling, but it stopped after a few minutes. The witness heard yelling, but it stopped after a few minutes. So the witness assumed They worked out their money issue or whatever. The following morning, the witness saw the man leaving the room, and he smiled as he headed down the hallway to the elevators, and that was the last the witness saw of him. Everything wasn't all right, because the prostitute was decapitated and put in the mattress into the spring. Yes, the actual box springs of the mattress. That's where she was shoved. Bill and his wife, Karen, stood frozen in horror as the police officers continued to examine the grisly scene. The stench of death hung heavily in the air, making it difficult to breathe. The officers carefully documented the details of the crime scene, taking photographs and collecting evidence that might be able to catch the ruthless killer. Detective Sarah Miller, the lead investigator, approached Bill and Karen with a grim expression on her face. She offered her condolences and assured them that they would do everything in their power to solve the heinous crime. Bill, still in shock, managed to ask, "Do you have any leads?" Sarah nodded, explaining that they had some potential evidence, including fingerprints and surveillance footage from the hotel. She promised to keep them updated on the progress of the investigation. In the following weeks, Bill and Karen struggled to cope with the trauma of what they had experienced. The nightmares were relentless, replaying the gruesome images over and over in their minds. They sought therapy to help them deal with emotional scars left by the brutal murder that had taken place in their hotel room. Meanwhile, the police diligently worked on the case, chasing leads, conducting interviews. The surveillance footage revealed a man leaving the hotel on the morning of the murder, confirming the witness's account. The investigators also found the victim's purse, hidden in a nearby alley, containing a clue that would ultimately break the case wide open. The purse held a crumpled receipt from a nearby convenience store, time-stamped around the time of the murder. Detectives quickly obtained security footage from the store, which captured a clear image of the suspect purchasing a knife and gloves. With this critical piece of evidence, they were able to identify the man and locate his residence. A high-risk arrest operation was planned and executed swiftly. The suspect was apprehended, and a search of his home revealed additional evidence linking him to the crime. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Bill and Karen felt a sense of closure, knowing that the man responsible for the horrific act was in custody and would face justice. However, the scars of that night would forever haunt them, a constant reminder of the darkness that could intrude upon even the most ordinary moments of life. They found strength in each other, determined to move forward and find a way to heal from the trauma that had shattered their sense of safety and peace. The end. Now that's the end of that urban legend tale, and I don't know if you noticed, but it did say that when Karen and Bill found the body, they fled the hotel without their luggage, right? And they literally went home, booked the next flight and went home. But then it said that the police officer in the room confronted Bill and Karen about the scene. So, yeah, that's kind of a mistake in the story. Because if they fled and went home, surely the police would have to contact them at home, not at the hotel room, you know. And if they fled, they didn't even tell the people, like, I found a body, you know. They just sort of like ran. I don't know. It's a bit weird, that story. But thank you for listening, and many blessings. Wisteria. Energy. Twister. Wisteria. Energy. Twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So we're going to continue with our Drac von Stoller collection of stories. This one's called The Legend of Haunted Hills Cemetery. Deep in the woods on top of a desolated hilltop stood the most haunted cemetery ever known, called Haunted Hills Cemetery. Legend has it that in 1855, a man by the name of Jester Flats was the new sheriff in town. One thing the townspeople had no idea about when Jester Flats was appointed the new sheriff of Deadsville was that the sheriff had his view of how he wanted to bring law and order in the town of Deadsville. His way would be utilizing an axe. He was the most feared sheriff the town of Deadsville had ever known. According to the son of the sheriff, just after he was born, Jester's wife was caught in bed with another man in his own home. Jester happened to forget his axe that day and never left home without it. But this day would be a day he'd never forget. Jester noticed a horse tied to a tree next to his house. Jester didn't like the looks of it, so he cautiously opened the front door of his house and heard laughter coming from his upstairs bedroom. Jester took his axe out of the closet and went upstairs to investigate. Jester slowly opened the bedroom door, and there lying on his bed was his wife and another man. Jester started yelling at them both and said, "You both know how I feel about sleeping with another man's wife." Jester and the man got into a struggle, but Jester hit the man upside his head and he fell to the ground with blood dripping from his head. His wife pleaded with her husband not to kill him, but Jester said, "Shut up, woman." Then he raised his axe above his head and cut the lover's head off and limbs as his wife screamed in agony. Then he pulled his gun out of his holster, pointing it at his wife at point-blank range. Then he pulled the trigger. She fell dead to the floor, and Jester said, "Justice has been served." Most townspeople would make every effort to avoid crossing paths with Sheriff Flats, in fear of being falsely accused of a crime they never committed and facing the dreaded axe-wielding sheriff in court. After many years of law and order and the overcrowded Haunted Hill Cemetery from the axe-wielding sheriff, the townspeople had enough. They decided to take the law into their own hands. An angry mob of men decided to visit their sheriff, and it wasn't going to be a pleasant visit. The men rushed into the sheriff's office wielding their axes, and after the men chopped his body into a million pieces, they put his torso and limbs in a sack, carried his head with the bag to the Haunted Hill Cemetery for public display. The legend of Jester Flats and the Haunted Hill Cemetery cast a shadow over the town of Deadsville, chilling the hearts of the residents and visitors alike. But as with all tales of terror, curiosity does have a way of drawing people towards, things that we fear the most. A group of daring teenagers, fueled by a mix of bravado and skepticism, decided to put the legend to the test. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and the reckless fearlessness of youth, they set out to explore the Haunted Hill Cemetery one moonless night. The stories of echoing cries and ghostly apparitions were not enough to deter their determination to experience the supernatural firsthand. The air was thick with anticipation as the teenagers stepped foot into the eerie cemetery. The gravestones stood like silent sentinels, marking the final resting places of those whose lives had been cut short by the axe-wielding sheriff. Shadows danced among the tombstones, and a chilling breeze rustled through the trees, as if the spirits themselves were stirring in response to the intruders. As the teenagers ventured deeper into the cemetery, their flashlights flickered and cast wavering beams of light over the tombstones. Whispers seemed to drift on the wind. The air grew colder with each step. Unnerved but undeterred, they pressed on, drawn towards the heart of the haunted ground. At the center of the cemetery, the teenagers discovered a weathered headstone bearing the name Jester Flats. The moonlight revealed details of the carving, a grim representation of the axe-wielding sheriff himself. With an air of defiance, one of the teenagers said, "Let's see if this legend is real or just a bunch of old stories." They began to chant the name, Jester Flats, their voices growing louder with each repetition. Suddenly a distant sound echoed through the cemetery, the unmistakable sound of chopping, as if an axe was striking wood. The teenagers exchanged uneasy glances, their skepticism giving way to such an unease. A low moan carried on the wind, and the air seemed to thicken with an oppressive weight. Shadows twisted and contorted, taking on grotesque forms that danced along the edges of their vision. The teenage bravado wavered, as fear crept into their hearts. Then, in the darkness, a figure emerged. A spectral figure that bore an uncanny resemblance to the headstone carving. It was Jester Flats, or at least an apparition that bore his likeness. The ghostly sheriff brandished an ethereal axe, its blade glinting with a malevolent gleam. Frozen with terror, the teenagers watched the ghostly sheriff advance towards them. His eyes burned with an otherworldly fire, and his lips curled into a cruel smile. The sound of chopping grew louder, filling the air with a rhythmic cadence that sent shivers down their spines. Panic screams pierced the night as the teenagers turned to flee, but an unseen force seemed to hold them in place. The ghostly sheriff's laughter echoed in their ears as his spectral axe swung the air, the chilling sound of impact followed by heart-wrenching screams. Their desperate cries joined the chorus of those who had fallen victim to Jester Flats. Brutal justice. The apparition's laughter melded with their fear, creating a symphony of terror that never berated through that cemetery. And as quickly as it began, the night was consumed by an eerie silence, broke only by the wind whispering through the tombstones. The sun rose on the town that would forever remember the tragic fate of the curious teenagers who had dared to test the legend. Deadsville's haunted past declaimed yet more souls. A chilling reminder that some stories are not meant to be explored, but rather to be left in the shadows of the past and kept buried. And that's our first story from Drac von Stoller. The next story is an urban legend story. Of course, still by Drac von Stoller, though. Don't flash your headlights. Urban legend. It was Halloween night, and Jimmy was partying with a gang that he was excited about joining called the Demon Knights Gang. There was only one thing that would prove he was worthy of being part of the Demon Knights Gang, and Darren, who was head of the gang, would tell him. "Jimmy, you know it's not an easy thing joining our gang," said Darren. "I know, but I want to be somebody, and I'm not afraid of any challenge. So come on, tell me what it is you want me to do," asked Jimmy. "Okay, but there's no backing out once I tell you. And if you try to back out, the only thing you'll be getting is a bullet to the back," explained Darren. "Don't worry, I'm up for anything," replied Jimmy. "Here's what I want you to do. Follow me outside," explained Darren. Jimmy and Darren went outside to Darren's backyard. "See the car over there?" said Darren. "Yeah, I see it," replied Jimmy. "Get inside, let me know what you think," asked Darren. Jimmy opened the driver's side door and stepped in and said, "Wow, this is a real beauty," exclaimed Jimmy. Darren put his hands inside the driver's side window and bent over and said, "This is where you come in. Your job is to drive this car down Willow Road without any headlights on. And when the first car flashes their headlights at you, you will turn your car around and chase them down, running their car off the road. Then you will pull your car off the side of the road and pull out the shotgun that is in the back seat of the car, go up to their vehicle and finish them off with a shot to the head. Make sure they're dead. Then you will be accepted into the Demon Knights Gang." Jimmy replied with excitement, "I'm your man." Darren patted Jimmy on the shoulder and said, "I knew I could count on you." Jimmy said, "I'll do better than that. I'll bring their head back for proof and set the car on fire." "Okay then, I'll be waiting for you at my house at midnight," said Darren. Jimmy started the car and asked Darren what the time was on his watch. Darren replied, 7 p.m. Jimmy said, "See you at midnight with their head," laughing as he backed out in the car of Darren's driveway. Jimmy drove off to get something to eat and then watched a movie to pass the time away. Jimmy stopped by his apartment to get his watch, to make sure he left from the movie theatre by 11 to head to Willow Road, begin his initiation to the Demon Knights gang. After Jimmy finished his dinner, he arrived at the movie theatre by 9 p.m. and left the theatre by 10:45 p.m. Got in his car and headed down Willow Road to do what Darren told him to do. As Jimmy was driving down Willow Road without his headlights on, a car approaching, the driver said, "That driver is going to run off the road or cause an accident." So the driver flashed his headlights at Jimmy's car, and as the driver passed by Jimmy's car, Jimmy turned on the car's headlights, rear-ended the driver in front of him, causing the driver to lose control of his vehicle and crash into a ditch. Jimmy pulled his car off the side of the road, grabbed the shotgun from the back seat of his car, and approached the wrecked vehicle that he'd just run off the road. He pumped the shotgun, blew out the driver's side window. The driver in the vehicle, barely conscious, said, "What do you want?" "Your head," said Jimmy. The driver replied, "Please, don't hurt me." Jimmy said, "Shut up. Close your eyes, it will be over real quick." Jimmy raised the shotgun and shot the driver in the chest, then pulled a hunting knife out of his back pocket and cut the driver's head off his shoulders. Jimmy set the car on fire and brought the severed head back to his car and placed it in the front seat of the car and drove right back to Darren's house to show proof that he followed through the initiation. He could now be a real gang member of the Demon Knights. Jimmy sped off in his car as the driver's car burned, with the decapitated body inside. As the stroke of midnight came, Jimmy pulled into the driveway of Darren's house and took the severed head inside Darren's home and placed it on Darren's kitchen table and said, "I believe I passed the test and feel I'm worthy of being in your gang, the Demon Knights." Darren replied with excitement on his face, "You did follow through. I'm proud of you. And for that being said, you are an official member of the Demon Knights. Since you went way beyond what was expected, you would be my right-hand man. If I need business taken care of, if you know what I mean, I have no doubt that you will not let me down." Darren handed Jimmy a leather jacket with the Demon Knights gang embroidered on the back of the coat. Jimmy put the jacket on. Obviously, he was beaming with delight. Finally, I belong to a gang and have real friends that need me. Jimmy finally got his wish, for all the dangerous circumstances, of course. And if by the chance you find yourself traveling down Willow Road at night and a vehicle is driving without their headlights on, it might be a good idea to ignore it and drive on, or you might end up like that poor driver that flashed his headlights and lost his head over the whole ordeal. The end. But of course, that is the way Dracula and Stella will tell the story. As you know, he does like to change them a little bit so they are not exactly the same as what they would be. And the next story, though by Drac von Stella, is called Drac von Stella Has Risen from the Grave. After Drac von Stella and Nick Mondrell's takeover of the world in 666 days, Nick and his wife Isabella lived a simple life in Drac von Stella's castle, the old castle, for many years. But Nick wanted to be what Drac von Stella was, and all that was on his mind was being the king of the vampires. Nick couldn't shake off the thought of just being Drac von Stella's right-hand vampire the rest of his life. So Nick decided to invite Drac von Stella to his castle and poison him and drive a stake through his heart. With Drac von Stella out of the way, Nick Mondrell would take over the throne and become king of the vampires. Nick sent the invitation by way of one of his henchmen on horseback, arrived a few days later, knocked on Drac von Stella's castle door. The rain was intense, with a lot of thunder. The door opened, and Drac von Stella's servant answered and said, "May I help you?" "Yes, I was sent by Nick Mondrell to deliver this invitation to Drac von Stella," Nick Henchman's replied. Drac's servant said, "I'll see that Drac von Stella receives the invitation." Drax's servant entered Drac von Stoller's study to deliver the invitation. The servant said, Drac, I have an invitation that has just been delivered by Nick Mondrell's henchman. Drac placed his hand out, and the servant placed the invitation in Drac's hand. Drac opened the request and read it aloud. Nick has invited me over to his castle for dinner tomorrow evening to celebrate our friendship and the takeover of the world. Drac was excited to see his good friend Nick once again, but Drac's excitement about spending some time with his friend tomorrow evening would be short-lived, once Nick added a little poison to his drink. Drac told his servant he was going out for the night, would be hanging out with some friends at the Vampire Tavern. Drac sped off down the road to Vampire Tavern. Drac pulled into the parking space that was reserved for him, stepped out of his car, and entered the Vampire Tavern for a night of drinking and live music. Drac stepped up to the bar, and the bartender said, Drac, what can I get you tonight? Oh, make it a Bloody Mary on the rocks, Wolfman. The Wolfman howled and poured Drac von Stoller the Bloody Mary. Drac gulped it down, wiped the blood from his mouth, slammed his glass down on the bar and said, Pour me another, Wolfman. Make it a little stronger. The Wolfman poured him another. Then Drac said, I'll see you shortly. I'm just going to listen to my favourite band, the Ghouls of the Night. Okay, Drac, I'll see you around, the Wolfman howled. Drac partied hard, as he always does at the Vampire Tavern, but Drac knew the fun had to end before the sun would start to rise. Drac checked his watch, downed a few more shots of Bloody Mary, and said goodbye to the band, staggered over to the bar and said, Hey, Wolfman, I'll see you tomorrow night. The Wolfman replied, I'll be here waiting to pour you up some more Bloody Marys when you return. Drac exited the tavern, got in his coffin car, drove back to his castle to sleep just before sunrise. Then when the sun set, he would head over to meet Nick Mondrell in the castle for dinner and celebration. But for Drac von Stoller, the only thing that would be celebrated at Nick's castle would be his death. Night came. Drac von Stoller rose from his coffin and said goodbye for the last time to his servant, then got in his coffin car, sped off down the road to Nick's castle as the rain poured down and the lightning lit up the skies, the thunder cracked open and the atmosphere settled in the distance. Drac's eyes were red as fire as the excitement of spending time with his friend Nick was just moments away. Drac pulled to the gate of Nick's castle. One of Nick's henchmen opened the gate to let Drac drive on through, where death was waiting for him very soon. As Drac pulled up to the front of the castle, the henchman opened Drac's car door and said, Hurry, Drac, it's pouring down hard out here. Nick's been expecting you. Drac shook off his cape, and the henchman let Drac inside the castle. Nick escorted Drac into the study, while his maidservants prepared their meal for their dinner. Nick poured Drac a Bloody Mary. Nick poured himself a vampire drink he concocted himself. Well, Drac, it's been a very long time since we've been able to sit down as friends and talk about our victory over the earth, said Nick, with a smile on his face. Yes, it has. I couldn't think of anyone I would rather share this moment with, replied Drac. Why don't we toast to our victory over the earth? We could not have done this without our team of vampires, said Nick, and their glasses touched together. Nick watched with excitement on his face as Drac von Stoller finished off his Bloody Mary drink that was laced with poison. Nick proceeded to open a wooden box on his desk which contained a stake that would be used to drive through Drac von Stoller's heart. Drac said, Nick, I'm having a tough time breathing right now. Drac gasped for air once again and said, Nick, why? Then Drac's head hit the top of Nick's desk. But Nick knew poison would not be enough to finish off the vampire, especially the king of vampires. Nick called two of his henchmen to carry Drac von Stoller down to the family crypt, where Nick would drive a stake through his heart as he lies in the casket Nick had already purchased for Drac von Stoller's final resting place. As the two henchmen placed Drac's body in the casket, Nick said to the henchman, That will be all. The henchman left the crypt and Nick took the hammer and stake out of the wooden box. He placed the tip of the stake on Drak's chest and raised the hammer and pounded the stake through Drak von Stella's heart as Drak tried to pull the stake out. But he just said, "Nick, you'll never get away with this." Nick just laughed and said, "Oh, I just did. Now with you out of the way, I will be the king of vampires." Nick closed the lid of the casket and called a meeting with all the vampires throughout the world to announce his takeover of the throne and for proof that Drak von Stoller was dead in his coffin and his body was on display for one day so that other vampires could pay their last respects to the king of vampires. Nick assumed his role as king of vampires. That would be short-lived because one of Drak von Stoller's servants found out through one of Nick's henchmen when he was at the vampire tavern that Nick was keeping Drak von Stoller's body sealed in a tomb in his crypt heavily guarded by some of his henchmen round the clock. Drak's servant told the henchmen he could make him a vampire with special powers. Not even Nick possessed. Then, as the servant poured another glass of whiskey to the henchman, he pulled out a red bottle that only contained human blood and said, "Before I give you this special potion that was kept locked inside a vault of Drak von Stoller's castle, you must show me where Drak von Stoller's tomb is inside Nick's crypt. If I show you, will you give me the magic potion?" asked Nick's henchman. "Sure thing," as he was laughing under his breath. Drak's servant's magic vampire potion had no magic at all, and all Nick's henchmen would be getting for leading him to Drak von Stoller's crypt would be a slit of the throat. The henchman did as promised, and led him straight to where Drak von Stoller's body was. Luckily, the two guards were passed out drunk. They were meant to be guarding the tomb. Drak's servant thanked Nick's henchman and handed over the vampire potion, and the henchman drank it and said, "Now, I'm going to be king of vampires." That's when Drak's servant came up behind him and slit his throat and said, "You stupid fool, there was no magic vampire potion, just regular human blood." Drak's servant came over to where the guards were passed out drunk on the floor and slit their throats, then pushed the top of the tomb off, exposing Drak von Stoller's coffin, hoping removing the stake from his heart will bring him back to life. The servant carefully lifted the stake from the heart and watched in amazement as Drak von Stoller was slowly coming back to life. Drak von Stoller rose up out of the coffin. Thank you, kind servant. You'll be rewarded greatly for bringing me back to life." Drak von Stoller burst through the crypt door as more guards were approaching, trying to stop him from leaving. But Drak von Stoller's powers were too strong for them, and Drak was able to fight them off and escape back to the castle unscathed. Word got back to Nick about Drak von Stoller rising from the dead, which infuriated Nick, and he knew their friendship was over, and it would be a fight to the death with Drak von Stoller. Later that evening, Drak von Stoller and some of his loyal vampire friends stormed Nick Mondrell's castle out for blood. Drak von Stoller burst through Nick's study window and said, "Nick, you must die for your betrayal of me." Nick replied, "I was tired of being your right-hand vampire and wanted to be king of vampires, and the only way to be king of vampires was to kill you." Nick and Drak battled to the death for hours. Drak's powers were just too strong for Nick. Drak von Stoller said, "It's a shame it had to end this way, but you leave me no choice." Then Drak von Stoller tore into Nick Mondrell's chest and pulled out his heart and squeezed the last drop of blood into his mouth. Then he dropped Nick's lifeless body on the floor of the study and told his loyal vampires to spread the word throughout the world that Drak von Stoller had risen from the dead and now is king of vampires once again. Drak von Stoller decided right there he wouldn't have any more right-hand vampires by his side, so that he would be in total control of all vampires on the earth from now on. Drak von Stoller went on to be king of the vampires for hundreds of years, until he decided to pass on his title to the next great warrior vampire. The end. And those are three wonderful tales from Drac von Stoller. He does many short stories and lots of bundle collections. You can get them from Google Play Books, all for free, where you can read a complete series of full collections by Drac von Stoller. Thank you for listening, and many blessings. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Drac von Stoller collection. Wisteria here who will be reading the stories. This story is called Zombie Bride. Johnny and his new bride Marie were so excited that the wedding bells were going to ring at 7 p.m. that night and couldn't wait to arrive at their honeymoon destination after their wedding. But their wedding bliss was about to turn into wedding sadness. After the wedding was over, the two newlyweds got in their car, heading to the airport to their honeymoon destination. It started raining and lightning, causing Johnny's visibility of the road very difficult to judge the centre lines. But the two newlyweds were in love and not paying close attention to their surroundings. Marie sat close to Johnny, sharing kisses as their car barreled down the road. The moment their lips touched, another vehicle on the side of the road lost control and hit them head-on, causing Johnny's bride to be ejected from the car. Marie went headfirst through the car's windshield and passed through the windshield of the other vehicle that hit them head-on, killing her instantly. Johnny jumped out of his car in hopes his beautiful bride was still alive. But that would not be the case, because just as her head passed the windshield of the other driver's windshield, the jagged glass cut all the way through her neck, causing her head to be severed right off her shoulders, landing on the driver's front seat in the driver's lap. Johnny had no idea his bride had lost her head until he pulled her out of the windshield, and blood was spewing out of her jugular vein, all down his white tuxedo. Johnny fell to the wet ground with his headless bride in his arms, crying, "Why, God, why?" Johnny's dead bride's funeral wasn't held until a few days later because her parents were on an overseas trip celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. Before her parents arrived back from their trip, Johnny was hitting the bars, drinking and trying to drown out his sorrows, with little use. Every time Johnny would pass by a woman that resembled his bride, it sent flashbacks to the accident, and the more he stared at them, his mind made him think it was really her, still in her dress, alive and well, smiling at him, with open arms waiting for him to embrace her. But when he ran to her and put his arms around her loving image, the image faded. The woman would slap him across the face and yell out for the police to come take this crazy man away. The next morning, Marie's parents arrived home, only to be greeted by the police at their front door to break the bad news to them about their daughter being killed in a car accident. Marie's parents blamed Johnny for their daughter's death, even though the police report said otherwise. After Marie's funeral, Johnny's guilt was eating him up inside about not being able to save the woman he promised to protect, and how she was swept away from his life forever. The following night, Johnny decided to go to the cemetery, dig up his bride and take her home, take care of her so that they could be together forever. Johnny lost it, because no sane man would dig up his spouse and take a rotting corpse home and pretend she was still alive and that they could function as an average couple. But Johnny dug her up, took her home, laid his headless bride on the bed. That was going to be theirs to share. Johnny said, "I think I forgot something. I know, I left her head on the passenger seat." Then he said, "Honey, I'll be right back." Johnny went to his car to retrieve her head and placed it on her shoulders to make her look whole again, and turned out the lights and went to sleep, holding his dead bride in his arms. The next morning, Johnny sprayed perfume all over a wedding dress to bring down the stench. Obviously, he brought a rotting corpse to the house. It stunk. He actually brought her downstairs to cook them both some breakfast. As Johnny placed a body in the chair and placed her head upon her shoulders, it just rolled off onto the kitchen floor. After several attempts of placing her head back on her shoulders, he decided to put her head on the table facing in front of his plate so he could feed her while he ate as well. Johnny lost touch with reality. He would talk to her while he was feeding her and downing a whiskey bottle. After he was through eating, he brought his dead wife into the TV living room so they could just chill and watch together. Johnny put his arm around her corpse as though they were on a date. In a drunken state, Johnny would turn her head on her shoulders facing him so he could kiss her cold, rotting lips. Johnny eventually passed out drunk and woke up hours later as darkness set in. Johnny sobered up a little and told his dead wife that it was getting late and they should get some sleep because they had a long day ahead of them tomorrow. Johnny picked up his headless bride, threw her right over his shoulder, and carried her severed head in his left hand and headed upstairs to turn in for the night. Johnny barely made it up the stairs because he was feeling a little drunk still. Finally, he did reach the top of the stairs and opened their bedroom door, placed a rotting corpse on their bed. Johnny tucked in his bride, then laid right beside her, sprayed some more perfume on her because the smell was getting even more unbearable to withstand. Johnny reached over and turned off the light on the nightstand and said goodnight to his bride. Then as Johnny lay there sleeping, his dead bride stood up on his bed with her head on her shoulders and called out his name several times. Johnny finally woke up and turned on the lamp on the nightstand, thinking he just heard things, but he didn't imagine it at all. His dead bride said, "Johnny, I'm hungry." "I'll fix you something, my love." She chimed in and said, "I think you'll do just fine." His dead wife then proceeded to tear his flesh apart with her rotting teeth as Johnny lay there, screaming until his last breath. When morning came and his neighbor came out of his home to see where the overwhelming smell was coming from, well, the scent led straight to Johnny's house. The police were called out to investigate. The police knocked on Johnny's front door several times, and after no one came to the door, the police kicked in the door and had to cover their noses as they searched the house from top to bottom. Finally, one of the officers yelled out, "I found where the smell's coming from." All the other officers raced upstairs to Johnny's bedroom and couldn't believe their eyes. There, lying on the bed, was Johnny's torn-apart body, with his headless bride laying on top of him. The police assumed it was a murder-suicide and left it at that. As much as Johnny loved his new bride, he should have left her in the ground and visit her grave as any sane person would. But his guilt took over and disturbed him, which made him disturb her final resting place. And, well, he paid a fatal price with his life for doing so. The end. That's the end of that story. Wow, it's a crazy guy. The next story by Drac von Stoller is called The Black Widow. Samantha Stone never had a chance to mature into a beautiful woman because of her looks that she was born in the eyes of a man's world. Samantha's beauty was not earth-shattering, even though Mother said she was beautiful just the way she is. Samantha stood 6 feet tall, with matted hair and brown eyes. It's a shame her hopes and dreams of becoming a model someday would be shattered before she is a thoroughly grown-up woman. Every man that gazed upon her, well, let's just say it was not in a respectful way. After years of disappointing relationships, Samantha snapped and decided these lustful dogs would pay dearly for not treating her with respect. Samantha always confided in her best friend Sarah to help her get through her rough times. One night, as Samantha was crying on Sarah's shoulder, Sarah chimed in and said, "I'm sick and tired of the way these dogs, meaning men, are treating you. So being the friend that I am, who loves and cares about you, I want you to call this woman who can help you. Her name is Gilda, and yes, she's a witch. But if any one person in this world can help you, she can. Yes, I too said the same thing about why would I call upon a witch to solve my problems. I feel like I can conquer anything that stands in my way thanks to Gilda the Witch. Please, give her a call. Thank you so much, Sarah. You're a true friend. And don't worry, you have my promise that I will call her in the morning, said Samantha. Morning came. Samantha contacted Gilda by phone to seek revenge on her tormentors. Gilda reassured Samantha that she had the perfect spell to help her solve a problem. As Samantha hung up the phone, she wiped the salty tears from her cheeks and took in a deep breath and stared into a bathroom mirror saying, I'm going to get my life back and make them all pay. She hurried up, getting dressed, and got in her car with anticipation of meeting Gilda. The weather conditions were windy and rainy as the vehicle barreled down the road. Her adrenaline was rushing through her veins like a freight train. As her car turned into the gravel driveway, she started having second thoughts. But she knew if she backed out, she wouldn't only let herself down, but the one and only person who never let her down. That's Sarah. She knew the pain was too great to give up now, so she proceeded to drive up the driveway to Gilda's cabin in the woods. The closer her car got to the cabin, the more frightened she became. But there was no turning back now. All she could see in her rearview mirror was her best friend Sarah's face telling her she could do this and get the vengeance she wanted. Samantha's car came to a rolling stop in front of Gilda's cabin. She grabbed her umbrella and got out of her car into the rainy night and approached the cabin with caution. Before she had a chance to knock on the cabin's door, the front door opened slowly, and there stood Gilda, just as Samantha had pictured her in her mind, old and dressed in black. Gilda motioned for her to enter the cabin. Samantha came in with a frightened look on her face, but the witch Gilda reassured her that she was safe and that she had already talked to her friend Sarah about the reasons for needing help. The witch motioned for her to sit in the chair next to the fireplace. The witch handed Samantha a cup that contained the potion that would give her what she needed to carry out her quest for vengeance. The witch told her when she woke in the morning, the drink will take full effect. As promised by the witch Gilda, Samantha transformed into a beautiful woman. But that's not all. When Samantha rose out of bed and walked up to her dressing mirror, with her eyes closed, she slowly opened them and screamed, I'm beautiful! I'm beautiful! Samantha paraded around her room and called Sarah to tell her the news, and said to Sarah, there has to be more than this potion I drank because being beautiful only made these dogs, men, lust over me even more. Sarah said, I guess the next man that gazes upon you, something strange may happen. I don't know. After spending a few hours on the phone, nightfall set in. Samantha told Sarah she was getting ready to hit the bars to see what happens to the dogs. That is, men, of course. Samantha got all dolled up and headed to the nearest bar, where the men that frequented there gave her so much trouble. As she entered the bar, every man's head turned, with eyes bugged out of their sockets and tongues wagging, hoping they would be one that would get their dusty jewel plucked. Men were whistling at her as she strutted up to the bar ready for a date, and knew which man she had set her mind on. That was Tom and Dave, because they were her biggest tormentors. Samantha tapped the two men on their shoulders and said, Hey boys, you gonna buy me a drink? They both turned their heads and said, Sure thing, baby. Samantha sat between both of them and said, Do you recognize me? I'm Samantha. Both men's jaw dropped. They dropped their beers on the floor. Before the men could get a word in, Samantha asked them both over to her place as a peace offering. Both men looked at each other and said, You bet. The two men followed her out of the bar and got in the car. As she started the car, she turned towards them and said, Are you boys ready for a wild night? And they both said, Yes. Samantha was laughing under her breath as the car sped down the road. Both men gave the high five, thinking they were getting a night of pleasure any man would desire from a woman of such beauty. Well, we're here. Are you boys ready for some action? Said Samantha. They both eagerly replied, You betcha. Both men exited the car, grinning from ear to ear as they opened the car door for her. Samantha put her arms around both men's shoulders as they walked to the doorstep of her house. As Samantha escorted the two men to her bedroom, she said, I'm going to freshen up. And while I'm doing that, why don't you boys get undressed and pull the bedsheet down, because this is going to be a red-hot night. The boys got undressed and did everything she asked. They thought they were on top of the world. Samantha surfaced moments later in a sexy teddy and said, Boys, are you ready? These two lustful dogs, men, said, Yeah, baby. Samantha turned off the lights, and one of the men chimed in and said, Why'd you turn the light off? Samantha replied, It makes things more special. Then all of a sudden, Samantha transformed into a giant black widow spider. The lights came back on, and she pounced both men as her eyes widened. They did not know what the hell was going on. Both men tried their best to fight off the giant black widow spider, but they heard the voice of Samantha saying, Payback's a bitch, isn't it? Then the black widow spider spun a web over their bodies, holding them as a prisoner. The spider then bit into each one's neck until their heads rolled off the bed. All that was left was a bloody bed with web covering two headless bodies. Samantha had transformed back into the beautiful woman she was, but there was another catch to the witch's spell. That was, when Samantha was through killing all the tormentors, she would die. Samantha went on to kill another two men that gave her such torment to her for many years. Unlike Samantha, the black widow spider's fangs sunk into the last man's chest, and he took his last breath. So did she. When the police arrived at her home, because she was the last person seen with the man she killed, they got the shock of their lives. There, lying in a pool of blood in the bed, was the giant black widow spider, dead on top of a dead man's body. The police had never encountered anything unexplainable such as this in all the years on the force. They weren't about to link this bizarre murder to the press, because no one would believe their story anyway. Word to the wise, if you feel the need to degrade any woman, you may want to think twice. If you don't, you too could end up dead from underestimating what a tormented woman might have in store for you in the future. The end. Well, that's definitely an interesting story from Drac von Stella, the Black Widow. I can picture it now. So let's move on to the next story. This one's called Voodoo Doll, of course by Drac von Stella. Dr. Phillips was an archaeologist that had a hunger for finding the big one, meaning a dig that would put him in the history books. But Dr. Phillips wasn't a very patient man, and if anyone got in the way of him finding something worth celebrating, they were dead men. One night, while Dr. Phillips was reading his newspaper and smoking his pipe, he came across an interesting article that said there was a dig deep in the jungles of Africa, but no one had been able to recover the artifacts. And if they did, they would die, literally trying to. Being that Dr. Phillips' ego and temper was so big, he wasn't afraid of anything, knowing that if he were to bring ancient artifacts back to the US, he would get his wish of being famous and in the history books. So, Dr. Phillips chartered a plane and brought two of his closest colleagues along with him, Dr. Reeves and Dr. Smith. Dr. Phillips only brought his colleagues along in case they were to discover the artifacts. He would obviously shoot them if they sort of tried to take off with them, and then leave the body for the wild animals to feast on. Dr. Phillips and his colleagues arrived late afternoon at the dig site to survey the area before the dig in the morning. Dr. Phillips could hardly sleep that night. He was excited about the excavation in the morning. Dr. Phillips paced back and forth outside the tent and decided to load his pistol and make sure he had enough ammo on him to stop anyone that got in his way. Morning finally arrived, and Dr. Reeves and Dr. Smith shared a pot of coffee on their portable stove outside their tent with Dr. Phillips before starting their dig. Dr. Reeves said, "Dr. Phillips, do you think we'll find anything worth bringing back to the States?" Dr. Phillips replied, "I didn't come all this way for a weekend getaway, spend thousands of dollars for just the heck of it. You'd better believe we're not coming back home empty-handed." Dr. Smith chimed in and said, "I've known Dr. Phillips many years, and I've never known him play around when it comes to something this serious." "Okay, Dr. Reeves and Dr. Smith, are you ready to make history?" They said, "You bet we are." The three doctors set off into the jungle to start the dig. Dr. Reeves asked, "Who is that man over there?" Dr. Phillips replied, "He's probably trying to steal the ancient artifacts out of that cave." "What are we going to do?" exclaimed Dr. Smith. "I tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to tell the man to get off this property because I paid a lot of money securing this site," said angry Dr. Phillips. Dr. Phillips approached the man who was wearing a headdress and said, "Excuse me, sir, you're going to have to leave because my colleagues and I have a lot of work to do. I don't need anyone snooping around or disturbing this dig site. I'm only going to ask you nicely one time. If you don't leave this moment, I'll be forced to shoot you and let wild animals dispose of your body." The old man laughed. "I'm not going anywhere. You and your friends are the ones who will have to leave, because this is my ancestors' sacred ground, not yours." Dr. Phillips pulled out his gun and pointed it straight at the old man's head and said, "I'll give you 2 seconds to leave. If you don't, you're a dead man." The old man laughed and pulled out a doll. It looked exactly like Dr. Phillips. He took out a needle and poked it in the side of the doll's neck. Dr. Phillips dropped to the ground. The old man was a witch doctor. He twisted the doll's head off his shoulders. Dr. Phillips' head rolled off his shoulders as Dr. Reeves and Dr. Smith stood in fear as the witch doctor pulled out 2 more voodoo dolls and put needles in their heads. The 2 doctors tried to run, but the witch doctor twisted the dolls' heads off, and the doctors' heads fell off their shoulders as their bodies dropped to the ground. The witch doctor just laughed and built a fire, then tossed the voodoo dolls into the fire and watched the 3 doctors' bodies burn to ashes. The men were presumed to be missing in the jungle of Africa. A search was conducted, but turned up nothing, no leads to their whereabouts. Dr. Phillips bit off more than he could chew by not listening to an old man that, unbeknownst to him, was a voodoo witch doctor. If he only knew in advance that a voodoo witch doctor's ancestors were buried at the dig site, maybe Dr. Phillips would have found another dig site. But let's be honest, he probably wouldn't have stopped. He was an egotistical doctor, and he was going to go ahead with the expedition anyway. So maybe he got exactly what he deserved. The end. And those are another wonderful 3 stories from Drac von Stoller. Thank you so much for listening, and many blessings. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to the Drac von Stoller collection. This story is called 13 Witches. Before I begin this story, remember when you were a little boy or girl, how vivid your imaginations were. When you read a book, you could close your eyes and somehow be in the story, see the scenery, have the characters come alive. In this story, you're about to find out about a little boy named Victor, who will bring his imagination to life on canvas, but this will have fatal consequences. Even though Victor's life was pretty messed up because of his alcoholic parents, he never grew up in in a dream, sort of a dream home, let's say. But he had a dream of becoming a famous painter. Victor, being an only child, would think his parents would spoil him rotten, but since the bottle was the only thing they cared about, Victor had to take a back seat and figure out his life on his own. As Victor's passion for painting grew each day, it was getting easier to drown out his sorrows of not having a stable family life. Anytime Victor would get excited about a painting he worked so hard on, he would run downstairs, show it off to his parents, but all he got, in the end, were heartaches. Finally, he said after painting what he thought was his best yet, "Maybe this time they'll be proud of me." But the only reaction he got when he showed it to them was laughter and belittlement by telling his parents was absolute junk. His father said a dog could paint better than that. Then his father and mother opened their cans of beer, threw beer all over the painting, and they laughed hysterically. Victor started crying and shouted out loud, "I wish you were both dead." His parents just laughed even more, popped another can of beer, and put it down the neck, threw their empty cans of beer at him, hitting him in the back of the head. Victor ran upstairs to his room, crying and angry as hell. He wiped the tears from his face and decided to get out of the house for a while so he could cool down and get a breath of fresh air. Victor's parents never took him outside to see the world, so he could associate with kids his age. And if that would happen, it would probably be kind of frightening to him, but at the same time exciting. Victor got on his jacket and marched out of his room down the stairs. As he was heading towards the front door, his father said, "Where do you think you're going, Picasso?" as he guzzled down another beer. "I'm going out for a while." He slammed the door behind him. His father got up from the kitchen table with beer in hand, then opened the door and yelled out for Victor to get back in the house. But Victor didn't turn around. He kept on walking. His father yelled out again, "Hey, Picasso, when you get back home, you're going to get the whipping of your life." Victor's mother raised her head out of the kitchen and said to her husband, "Just let him go. Get back in here, help me finish off the rest of the case of beer. Then we'll go upstairs and fool around." "Sounds good to me. Besides, it's just a thorn in our side. Wish we never had a child to spend our money on." Victor pressed on the road, soaking up the sun, feeling good inside. So much he forgot about his uncaring parents back home. The sight of seeing the buildings and people passing by him in the streets laughing, having a great time, just added to the excitement of not being cooped up in his room all day and night. Also, staring out of his bedroom window, fantasizing about what it would be like to see the world out there. Moments later, Victor's world was about to change. It would never be the same again the moment he stepped foot inside an antique store around the corner. He almost passed the store, but something made him stop in his tracks. Then he gazed up at the broken, dirty sign that read, "Antique Store." He approached the door of the store, as though some force was pulling him there. So he opened the creaky door and stepped inside, and an old gentleman said, "Come on in, little boy. I'm sure you'll find what you're looking for." Victor said, "Thanks." He started looking around. It wasn't long before he found something. At the back of the store, on a shelf, was a wooden box with dust on it. Victor picked up the box to examine it, and when he blew off the dust, he was intrigued by the intricate detail of the handcrafted box. He knew right off the hand it had to be very old, and just as he opened the box to examine its contents, a bright luminescence surrounded the objects in the box. Victor rushed over to the front of the store to find out more about the box and its contents. He placed the box at the counter by the cash register and said, "Sir, could you please tell me about this box of paints and brushes? It looks ancient. I'd like to buy it." The old man smiled and said, Little boy, I don't ask the owners about what they bring into my store. I just buy them from them and hope to make a few dollars on each item, so I can keep the bills paid. So the store can remain open until I can no longer afford to keep it open. The boy said with a big smile on his face. Well, that's okay. I love to paint, and these old paints and brushes are what I need because I don't have any nice brushes. All my brushes are plastic. The bristles keep falling out every time I use them. So, if you could tell me how much, I would appreciate it. The old man said $20. Victor felt like his whole world came to an end because all he had in his pocket was a quarter. A river of tears came rolling down his cheeks as he looked with sadness into the old man's eyes. Victor slowly turned away from the counter and walked towards the front door, to leave to go back to the miserable life he had waiting for him back home. Victor was crushed because he loved painting so much, felt like he finally had the necessary tools at his fingertips to evolve into a kind of artist that always he would dream to be. As Victor put his hand on the doorknob of the front door of the store to exit the antique store, the old man said, "Boy, come here." Victor turned round and wiped the tears off his face and replied, "Why, I don't have that kind of money. My parents would never give it to me either." The old man asked Victor, "How much do you have?" Victor replied, 25 cents. The old man said with excitement on his face, "I'll take it." Victor couldn't believe what he was hearing. He didn't question it either. He reached in his pocket, pulled out the shiny quarter, and placed it on the counter. The old man took the quarter and told him to have a beautiful day and enjoy the paints. Victor grabbed the box and said, "Thank you so much." Then he ran out of the store. But little did he know, that was no ordinary old man. It was a ghost. As Victor was standing outside of the antique store holding the box tightly in his arms, he looked back at the store as he was walking away, and it vanished into thin air. Victor was so excited to have his new box of paints and brushes that he didn't think much about it and just kept on walking towards home. Finally, Victor made it home. Didn't bother telling his parents about getting his new brushes and paints as he walked past them, which didn't matter anyway because they were both passed out at the kitchen table from being drunk. He thought about walking up to show off his new paints, but he knew they would laugh at him. So he just kept walking until he made it to his bedroom, shut the door behind him, shut out the world, bury himself in his work. Victor opened his box of paints on the desk. Then all of a sudden there was a bright, illuminating light surrounding the paints and brushes. The bright, illuminating light didn't bother him at all. He just felt a sense of calm that had come over him and pulled out each paint and brush to start painting. He just realized he had no paper to use his new paints on. Then he started crying aloud again. What am I going to do now? Then out of nowhere, an easel with a canvas appeared next to his desk. Victor heard a faint voice say, "Look up, Victor." Victor raised his head off his desk. He wiped away the tears from his eyes and then rubbed his eyes again. He thought it was just a dream, but this was no dream at all. He laughed and got up from his chair, touched the easel and canvas, and said with a big smile, "I don't know what just happened, but thank you, whoever made this happen." Victor didn't realize he was about to open Pandora's box. And no matter from that moment on, there was no turning back from the evil that would be unleashed in the canvas. As he dipped his brush into the paint, he no longer had control over his thoughts or actions. Victor also did not know the history behind the box of colours and brushes. If he had known, I'm sure he would not have bought them, or anyone else for that matter. Legend has it that a wannabe artist by the name of Boris Hellman tried and tried for years to become a master painter. But instead of giving up, he just painted anyway, which ended up driving him mad, because no one wanted his work, and all they did was laugh or spit at his canvases. And that's when an horrific turn of events took place. He began to lure unsuspecting women into his rundown house and told them they would become works of art on his canvas, and that it would make them wealthy and famous around town. But he had other plans for them instead. Boris was pretty much penniless, but he was a smooth talker and a handsome man, so obviously the women overlooked his rundown home and did as he asked. Boris would tell them he needed some of their blood to paint with and promise them it would be painless. But when the one would see the razor-sharp instrument that he pulled out of the box, they would have a change of heart and want to leave immediately. Boris was infuriated, and instead of letting them go, he would slit their throats, drain enough of their blood to fill his empty jars that used to hold real paint in them. It wouldn't be long before the town suspected that Boris had something to do with the missing women. Eventually, he was caught in the act and was shot to death. But the box he stored his paints of his victim's blood, and the brushes survived. They ended up in the witch's hands, and that's when things took an even darker turn. The witches put a spell on the box that read inside the bottom of the box: whosoever this box comes into the hands of and uses the contents will release an evil from hell like no other and will die a horrific death. Victor never looked at the writing on the inside of the box. He probably wouldn't have cared because he was so excited about being able to paint now, seeing that he had everything he needed to get started. Victor placed his paint jars on the flat panels at the bottom of the easel, started thinking about what he could paint. But that didn't matter, because an evil presence took over his body. And this would do all the painting for him. As each painting was completed at a rapid pace, he couldn't believe what he saw on the canvas. Each painting was that of a woman, and the last picture was completed. Then the evil's presence that was in Victor's body came out, and Victor looked in amazement and said, "Did I paint these? Wow, there are 13 of them. What an odd number." Then out of nowhere, an evil voice said, "You must die now." Instead of feeling joy about what he had done, he was feeling terrified. He called out to the voice and said, "Why must I die?" The evil voice said, "The box of paints is cursed. Whosoever has the box, uses the paints, will unleash 13 witches to wreak havoc on this world." Then all of a sudden, the lights went out for a brief moment. When they came back on, Victor was surrounded by 13 witches. He was unaware what he had been used for by this evil force. Victor tried to run, but his feet wouldn't move no matter how hard he tried. Then one of the witches said, "Don't be afraid. It will all be over in a second." Victor screamed out for his parents, but by the time his parents reached his bedroom door, it was too late. As his parents opened Victor's bedroom door, his mother screamed and fainted, and his father just stood outside the door in total shock at what he saw. What they both saw was one of the witches holding Victor's severed head by his hair in one hand. Then the witch holding Victor's head said, "Here, catch," and tossed the severed head to the father. But the moment he caught the head in his arms, he fell to the floor and suffered a massive heart attack, died on the spot. Then the witches vanished into thin air. When Victor's mother awoke, she saw her dead son's severed head on the floor next to her husband, and when she tried to wake her husband, she got no response. She too succumbed to the terrifying experience and died of a massive heart attack. It looks like Victor should have read the writing on the inside of the bottom of the box, but he didn't. Now the 13 witches can cast spells once again throughout the entire world. Hopefully, they can be stopped before the entire world is destroyed. so they all can be sent back to hell, where they probably do belong. The end. So that is a very interesting tale from Drac von Stoller. I like it. It's different, but kind of cool, right? Anyway, so we're going to move on to the next story by Drac von Stoller, and it's called The Impaler. During the reign of King Drac von Stoller in the 14th century, a war was brewing between Drac and the Berkeleys. Even though the Dracs and the Berkeleys fought against each other, both kings knew that one of them would ultimately die in the end. The Dracs were barbaric men who would rob, torture, and finalize things by impaling every living thing in the village. Drac's men would roast the village people alive while they were still impaled. Then, after the bodies were roasted, Drac von Stoller's liking, of course, it had to be, it was time to sit down for a feast. Drac's men would cut off pieces of roasted bodies and eat and drink wine as Drac von Stoller was cutting out the hearts of his impaled victims, squeezing every last drop of blood into his mouth. The Dracs were cannibalistic by nature, but this was what made the villagers more fearful of the name Drac. Whenever Drac von Stoller's authority was questioned, or just hungry for blood, he would squeeze the blood of humans' hearts into his mouth at least once a day so that no one would question his authority. If someone was going to bring harm to him or anyone associated with Drac von Stoller, they were immediately impaled. Their heart was cut out from their chest. After Drac squeezed the blood of their hearts into his mouth, he would stand up and shout out, "Whosoever questions my authority will have the same fate as this poor soul." As Drac was eating the arm of a man that killed one of his men, one of the Berkeley men rode on horseback to Drac's castle, shot an arrow with a message over the top of Drac von Stoller's castle, and it read, "The Berkeleys have waged an all-out war on the Dracs." One of the Drac's men came running down, shouting the message. "Well, it's about time," Drac said with a chuckle. "I haven't been to war with the Berkeleys in over 10 years. Let's not waste any more time. Let's prepare for war. Men, take what's left of the body that I've been eating and fry the skin, cut it into pieces, so I have something to chew on in battle. Put 1,000 pointed spears into the ground as preparation for victory against the Berkeleys." Morning came, and with it came a great war. Drac's army was just too strong and loved the taste of the enemy's blood. Just as Drac had envisioned, Berkeley's men were all impaled. All of Berkeley's army was set on fire, where their torn bodies were impaled. Drac watched with his blood-red eyes, licking his chops, savouring every moment. He anticipated the self-satisfaction he would get out of cutting all the Berkeley's men's chests open and ripping out their hearts. The rest of Drac's army sat at tables outside, ready to cut into the bloodied bodies and have a feast to celebrate their victory. After defeating the Berkeleys, Drac von Stoller's impaling lasted another 50 years. His fatal mistake was holding a masquerade party at the castle. This was a golden opportunity for the descendants of the Berkeleys. What better way to show up as a Grim Reaper, carry a scythe to finish Drac off? Everything went as planned. While Drac was squeezing a heart and drinking every last drop from it, the Grim Reaper came up behind Drac and swung his scythe. In one swift swoop, Drac's head flew off. The Grim Reaper held his head high in the air and said, "This is for all the Berkeleys that were impaled during the reign of Drac von Stoller," declared the Reaper. Since Drac was no longer the king, Drac's army surrendered to the descendants of the Berkeleys. Drac's men were taken back to the Berkeleys' castle, where they were either beheaded or impaled, just like the Berkeleys' descendants were. The death of Drac von Stoller brought an end to the reign of terror that had plagued the land for over half a century. The descendants of the Berkeleys finally had their revenge, and peace slowly settled over the war-torn region. With Drak gone, the barbaric practice of impaling cannibalism was put to rest. The Berkeley family, having experienced immense suffering under the rule of Drak, decided to lead the country in a new direction. They believed in justice, fairness, compassion, and were determined to rebuild the kingdom from ashes of its dark past. The new rules initiated numerous reforms, aimed at ensuring the well-being of people and preventing such atrocities from ever happening again. Impaling was outlawed, and instead a fair and just legal system was established. Punishments were meted out fairly, and the concept of innocent until proven guilty was embraced. Over the years, the descendants of the Berkeleys worked hard to restore peace and prosperity to the kingdom. They developed strong alliances with neighbouring countries, fostering trade and cultural exchange. The newfound peace allowed the kingdom to flourish, and its reputation started to change from a land of terror to a land of opportunity. As the years passed, the legend of Drak von Stoller and his castle persisted, spreading across the country. The castle remained abandoned, with no one daring to enter its dark, eerie halls. People claimed to hear ghostly cries and eerie laughter emanating from its crumbling walls, a haunting reminder of the evil that once resided within. Despite the ominous tales surrounding the castle, some adventurous souls couldn't resist the temptation to explore the secrets. Many entered the forsaken structure, hoping to find hidden treasures, unravel mysteries of the past. However, most who dared to enter never returned, leaving the castle to be shrouded in even more mystery and terror. In the aftermath of the war, the kingdom underwent a period of reconstruction and cultural revival. The descendants of the Berkeleys sought to erase the dark history while honouring the memories of those lost during the conflict. Memorials were built to commemorate the fallen, and a day of remembrance was established to pay tribute to the victims of Drak von Stoller's cruelty. The end. Well, that's another very interesting story. And I like how it's called The Impaler because if you are aware of, there's a story of Vlad the Impaler, of course, which I guess is where the story is sort of taken from, you know. The next story by Drak von Stoller is called Possessed.